Good evening, friend. Take a moment to settle in, wherever you are tonight. Perhaps you're listening from a quiet bedroom in Denver, or maybe you found your way to us from a cozy cottage in the English countryside. It always amazes me how many of you are listening from different parts of the world. A small apartment in Chicago, a cabin tucked away in the Rockies, or even from across the Atlantic in places where these very stories once unfolded. Let us know in the comments where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, find that perfect spot under your blanket. Pull it up to your chin if you'd like. Take a slow, deep breath, and let your body melt into the mattress, as if you're sinking into a soft cloud. Let your shoulders drop, release the tension in your jaw, and allow your eyelids to grow heavy. The day's worries can wait until tomorrow. Tonight, we're traveling back through time. Close your eyes and imagine this. You blink awake on a straw mattress, the faint scent of damp earth and wood smoke filling the air. The stone walls around you are rough-hewn and cold to the touch. Through a narrow window, you hear the distant clatter of a village slowly stirring to life. Wooden cart wheels creaking over cobblestones, the soft lowing of cattle, and somewhere in the distance, the steady rhythm of a blacksmith's hammer already at work. Your fingers brush against the coarse wool of your blanket, and you realize you're not in your modern world anymore. You've awakened in 14th century England, a time when life moved to the rhythm of church bells and the changing seasons. A time when justice was swift, public, and often brutal, yet strangely woven into the fabric of community life in ways that might surprise you. Tonight, we'll wander through villages where a baker's loaf could determine his fate, where medieval communities had their own peculiar ways of dealing with gossips and cheaters, and where the line between justice and spectacle was often beautifully, terrifyingly blurred. But don't worry, we'll take this journey slowly, peacefully, letting these old stories wash over you like gentle waves. So breathe deeply, let your mind drift back 7 centuries, and prepare to discover the curious, methodical world of medieval justice, where every punishment told a story, and every story helped a community sleep a little more soundly. The world moved slowly then, guided by the rhythm of seasons and the tolling of church bells that marked not just the hours, but the very heartbeat of medieval England. It was the year 1347, and you find yourself in a realm where most people never traveled more than 10 miles from where they were born, where news moved at the speed of a horse's gallop, and where justice was as public as the village well. In this time, before police forces or prisons as we know them, communities had developed their own intricate systems of maintaining order. These weren't just brutal spectacles of punishment, though they could certainly be that, but rather a complex web of social control that reveals fascinating truths about human nature and community life. What many don't realize is that medieval justice wasn't simply about inflicting pain. It was theater, psychology, and social engineering all rolled into one. The pillory wasn't just a wooden frame to hold someone's head and hands. It was a carefully calibrated device that put the offender at exactly the right height for the crowd to see their shame, but not so low that serious injury was likely. The stocks were positioned by the church door not by accident, but because that's where the entire community would pass by on Sunday, ensuring maximum visibility for minimum effort. The smell of fresh bread drifts from the baker's shop, where the guild regulations dictated that loaves must weigh exactly what they should, too light, and the baker might find himself in those same stocks by evening. You can hear the gentle creak of wooden carts as merchants set up for the day, their voices mixing with the distant bleating of sheep being driven to pasture. Here's something that might surprise you. Medieval communities were remarkably creative in matching punishments to crimes. A baker who sold underweight bread might be dragged through the streets on a wooden sledge with the offending loaf tied around his neck, a punishment called tumbrel. A brewer who watered down his ale might be forced to drink nothing but his own weak brew for a month. These weren't random acts of cruelty, but carefully considered responses that made the punishment fit not just the crime, but the person's role in the community. The feudal system created a world where everyone had a place, and everyone knew exactly what was expected of them. The lord of the manor held court not in some distant courthouse, but in the same hall where his tenants might feast during harvest festivals. Justice was personal, immediate, and tied directly to the rhythms of agricultural life. When crops were ready for harvest, even serious crimes might be postponed. After all, the wheat wouldn't wait for legal proceedings. As you drift deeper into this world, imagine the smoky interior of a manor hall where rough wooden benches are filled with villagers who serve as both jury and witnesses. The scent of rushes on the floor mingles with wood smoke from the great hearth. Here, in this simple setting, Decisions were made that could determine whether someone kept their hand, their freedom, or their life. The church bells ring out across the countryside now, calling people to evening prayers. And as that familiar sound echoes across the centuries, we begin our gentle journey into the fascinating, often surprising world of medieval justice, where every punishment told a story, and every story helped shape a community's understanding of right and wrong. Let your breathing slow now, as we prepare to walk these ancient paths together. You wake in your small cottage as the first pale light of dawn creeps through the single window. The air is crisp and carries the scent of dew-dampened earth mixed with the faint smell of yesterday's cooking fires still smoldering in hearths throughout the village. Your straw mattress rustles softly as you shift, and somewhere in the distance a rooster crows, though his call seems muffled by the morning mist that clings to the thatched roofs like a gentle blanket. Outside, you can hear the village slowly stirring to life. The creak of wooden shutters opening, the soft splash of water being drawn from the well, and the gentle murmur of voices as neighbors greet each other in the half-light. This is Millbrook, not its real name, of course, but we'll call it that as we drift through this medieval morning together. You dress in your simple woolen tunic and hose, the fabric rough but warm against your skin. Your shoes are leather, hand-stitched and resoled more times than you can count. As you step outside, the cold stone of your doorstep sends a small chill through your feet, awakening you fully to this medieval world. The village square spreads before you, no larger than a modern parking lot, but it serves as the beating heart of this small community. In the center stands the market cross, a stone monument that marks this as a place of legitimate trade, protected by both earthly and divine law. Around it, the morning ritual of medieval life begins to unfold with the predictable rhythm of centuries. What's fascinating about these medieval villages is how they regulated themselves through what historians call collective responsibility. Every household was part of a tithing, a group of 10 families who were legally responsible for each other's behavior. If someone in your tithing committed a crime and fled, the remaining 9 families would pay the fine. This created a powerful incentive for neighbors to keep an eye on each other, but not in a harsh way, more like an extended family watching out for one another. The baker, Thomas, emerges from his shop, and you can smell the warm, yeasty aroma of fresh bread. But here's something you probably don't know. Thomas doesn't just bake bread. He's also the village's unofficial timekeeper. In an age before clocks, people measured time by the baker's schedule. First bread at dawn, second batch at mid-morning, final loaves by early afternoon. Miss your timing, and you might go hungry until tomorrow. Thomas nods to you as he arranges his loaves on the wooden counter outside his shop. Each loaf bears his personal mark, a small cross pressed into the dough before baking. This isn't just decoration, it's a legal requirement. If a loaf is later found to be underweight, that mark will identify exactly who made it. The punishment for light bread could be a fine, or in repeat cases, a ride through the streets on the tumbrel cart while wearing the offending loaf around one's neck like a shameful necklace. The morning mist begins to lift, revealing more of the village's inhabitants. There's Margot, the alewife, carrying wooden buckets from her brewing shed. In medieval England, brewing was primarily women's work, and ale was safer to drink than water. Margot's ale is tested regularly by the ale tasters, village officials who ensure it's the proper strength and not watered down. A dishonest alewife might find herself in the ducking stool, a chair on a long pole used to dip the offender into the village pond. Not to drown, you understand, but to provide a memorable lesson in honesty. You may already be drifting off as the village hums with this gentle morning activity. Let your mind settle into the slow pace of medieval life, where everything moved to the rhythm of the seasons and the needs of the community. Near the church, you notice the wooden stocks standing empty in the morning light. The wood is worn smooth by weather and use, and someone has carved small flowers into the side posts, a curious decoration for an instrument of punishment. But that's the medieval way. Even justice could be beautiful, or at least made bearable through small human touches. The stocks weren't just about punishment, though. They served as a kind of social reset button. A merchant caught using false weights might spend a day in the stocks, enduring the disapproval of his neighbors, but afterward, the debt was paid. The community could trust him again, his children weren't shunned, and life continued. There was something almost therapeutic about this system, swift justice followed by genuine forgiveness. As the sun climbs higher, casting longer shadows across the cobblestones, you hear the soft chime of the church bell marking the hour. The The sound seems to wash over the village like a gentle wave, and you feel yourself relaxing deeper into this slower world, where time moved not by minutes, but by the natural rhythms of human need and community life. The morning's first business begins at the market cross. A farmer brings a cartload of turnips, their purple tops still covered with dew. A cloth merchant spreads his wares on a wooden table, the colors muted in the soft morning light. Each transaction is witnessed by the community, each price negotiated in the open, where all can see that fairness prevails. This transparency wasn't just tradition, it was survival. In a community where everyone depended on everyone else, trust was the most valuable currency. Break that trust, and you might find yourself not just in the stocks, but shunned by the very people you needed to survive. As the morning mist finally clears completely, you can see the outline of the manor house in the distance, where the lord of the village holds court twice a month. But that's a story for another time. For now, let the gentle sounds of medieval morning life wash over you. The creak of cart wheels, the soft conversation of neighbors, the distant lowing of cattle being led to pasture. You don't need to remember all these details. Just let the scene fade gently as the medieval sun climbs higher, warming the stone and wood of this ancient world. The story quietly moves on, carrying you deeper into the fascinating realm of medieval justice and community life. As the morning progresses and the village settles into its daily rhythm, you find yourself drawn toward the ancient stone church that anchors one end of the village square. The building has stood here for over 2 centuries, its walls thick enough to withstand both weather and time. The church isn't just a place of worship. It's the social center, the meeting hall, the record keeper, and often, the courthouse of this small medieval community. Your footsteps echo softly on the worn cobblestones as you approach the heavy wooden door, carved with intricate patterns that speak of craftsmen long since returned to dust. But it's not the church itself that captures your attention this morning. Instead, your gaze falls upon the wooden structure that stands just to the right of the entrance. The village stocks, occupied for the first time in several weeks. The man trapped within them shifts uncomfortably, his head and hands protruding through the smooth holes cut into the heavy wooden beam. His name is Willem, and he's what we might call a repeat offender, though his crimes are hardly what we'd consider serious today. Willem is a cut purse, a pickpocket, and yesterday he was caught red-handed attempting to lift a small leather pouch from a merchant's belt during the afternoon market. Take a moment to breathe deeply and settle into this scene. The morning air carries the scent of damp earth and the lingering smoke from cooking fires. You can hear the gentle murmur of conversation from other villagers going about their business, the distant sound of children playing, and the soft rustle of Willem's clothing as he tries to find a more comfortable position. There's something almost meditative about the slow pace of it all, the way time seems to stretch and flow like honey in this medieval world. What's fascinating about the stocks, and what most people don't realize, is that they weren't designed purely for torment. The height of the beam, the size of the holes, even the angle at which the victim was forced to stand were all carefully calculated. Too high, and the person might suffer permanent injury to their neck or spine. Too low, and the punishment would be ineffective. Medieval craftsmen who built these devices were surprisingly sophisticated in their understanding of human anatomy and endurance. Willem has been here since dawn, when the church bell rang for prime, the first prayer service of the day. He'll remain until Vespers, the evening service, giving him a full day to contemplate his choices while serving as a living reminder to others about the consequences of theft. But here's something that might surprise you. Willem isn't in any real danger. The villagers passing by offer him sips of small beer and even occasional kind words. One elderly woman, goodwife Margaret, stops to wipe the sweat from his brow with a damp cloth. This gentleness within the punishment reveals something profound about medieval justice. It wasn't just about inflicting suffering, it was about restoration and redemption. Willem's day in the stocks wasn't designed to destroy him, but to reintegrate him into the community through a ritual of public accountability and forgiveness. Let your mind drift now as we explore the deeper currents of this ancient system. The stocks were positioned by the church door for very specific reasons that go far beyond mere convenience. Every member of the parish was required by both religious and civil law to attend Sunday Massachusetts. This meant that every single person in the community would pass by the stocks at least once a week, ensuring that any punishment would be witnessed by the entire village. But there's more to it than that. The church door was also where public announcements were made, where bans of marriage were posted, and where important news was shared. It was the medieval equivalent of a community bulletin board, social media platform, and public square all rolled into one. Placing the stocks here meant that the punishment became part of the village's collective memory, woven into the fabric of community life. As you watch Willem shift his weight from one foot to the other, you notice the intricate details of his punishment that speak to the sophistication of medieval justice. His feet aren't shackled. He can move them freely, preventing the kind of circulatory problems that might cause permanent damage. A small wooden ledge provides just enough support to keep his weight off his neck when he grows tired. Even the holes in the stocks are lined with leather, worn smooth by use, to prevent chafing and cuts. The morning sun climbs higher, casting shifting shadows across the churchyard. A small group of children has gathered at a respectful distance, not to mock Willem, but simply to observe this unusual break in their daily routine. Their mother, a young woman carrying a basket of eggs, gently guides them away after a few moments, but not before nodding politely to Willem. Even in his disgrace, he remains a member of the community, deserving of basic human dignity. This is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of medieval punishment, its deeply communal nature. Modern justice systems often isolate offenders, removing them from society entirely. But medieval communities couldn't afford to lose members, especially in small villages where every hand was needed for survival. The goal wasn't to exclude the wrongdoer, but to publicly address the wrongdoing and then welcome the person back into the fold. As the hours pass, you might already be feeling drowsy as you watch this slow, ancient drama unfold. Willem's initial discomfort has settled into a kind of resigned endurance. He exchanges quiet words with passers-by, receives small acts of kindness, and gradually transforms from a criminal being punished into a neighbor who made a mistake and is paying his debt to the community. The construction of these particular stocks tells its own story. The wood is oak, chosen not just for its durability but for its symbolic meaning. The oak was sacred to the ancient Britons, representing strength and endurance. The iron hinges were forged by the village blacksmith, probably in trade for reduced punishment when he himself was caught selling substandard horseshoe nails 3 years ago. Every part of this device connects to the web of relationships that holds the village together. By midday, when the sun stands directly overhead and the shadows are short and sharp, Willem has settled into an almost meditative state. His breathing has slowed, his struggles have ceased, and he seems to have found a way to make peace with his situation. This, too, was part of the design. The stocks weren't just about public shame. They were about forcing the offender to slow down, to think, to experience the weight of community judgment while also experiencing community care. A traveling merchant, passing through the village on his way to the next market town, stops to examine Willem's situation with professional interest. Cut purses are a constant threat to merchants, and he's probably lost his share of coins to quick fingers over the years. But instead of anger or mockery, he shows something closer to pity. "Bad luck, friend," he murmurs, and leaves a small piece of bread within Willem's reach. This interaction reveals another layer of medieval justice, its theatrical quality. Willem's punishment isn't just for the village, it's for anyone who passes through. The stocks serve as both deterrent and advertisement. This community takes theft seriously, but it also treats its wrongdoers with a degree of mercy that speaks well of the village's character. As the afternoon progresses and the shadows begin to lengthen, you can sense the approaching end of Willem's ordeal. The church bell will soon ring for vespers, and he'll be released to return to his small cottage, his debt paid and his place in the community restored. Tomorrow, he'll wake up a free man, perhaps a bit stiff and sore, but no longer marked as a criminal. The stocks will stand empty again, waiting for the next person who needs reminding about the boundaries of acceptable behavior. The late afternoon light slants golden across the churchyard now, warming the old stones and casting everything in a soft, dreamy glow. You can hear vespers beginning inside the church, the soft chant of voices raised in ancient melodies that have echoed through these stone walls for centuries. As the last notes fade into the evening air, the church door opens, and the parish priest emerges to unlock Willem's restraints. There's no ceremony to the release, no speeches about redemption or warnings about future behavior. Willem simply rubs his wrists, nods his thanks to the priest, and walks slowly home. As he disappears around the corner of a thatched cottage, the stocks stand empty in the gathering dusk, their purpose served once again. Let your mind drift now with the lengthening shadows, as this medieval day draws to its close. The story of the stocks reminds us that justice, even in its harshest forms, was deeply human in this ancient world. As the evening mist begins to rise from the fields beyond the village, carrying with it the sense of grass and earth and the promise of rest, we too can let ourselves sink deeper into the gentle rhythm of medieval life, where every ending was also a beginning, and every punishment carried within it the seeds of forgiveness. 3 days have passed since Willem's time in the stocks, and the village has settled back into its familiar patterns. But this morning brings something different, a summons that echoes through the narrow streets like the church bell itself. "Court day at the manor," calls the bailiff, his staff striking the cobblestones with each proclamation. "All who have business with his lordship, present yourselves at the hall before the noon bell." You feel a gentle stirring of anticipation as you join the small procession making its way up the hill toward the manor house. The path is well worn, carved deep by centuries of feet walking this same route for the same purpose. On either side, the fields stretch out in their autumn colors, golden wheat ready for harvest, the dark earth of fallow strips resting between plantings, and the distant woods where the Lord's deer graze under the protection of forest law. The manor house rises before you like something from a dream, its stone walls mellowed by age and weather. It's not the grand castle you might imagine from fairy tales, but rather a sturdy, practical building designed for both comfort and defense. The great hall occupies the center, with its high ceiling and massive oak beams that still bear the scorch marks from the Great Fire of 1311. Smoke drifts lazily from the central hearth, and through the tall windows, you can see the warm glow of candles and the movement of servants preparing for the day's proceedings. Take a moment to breathe deeply and let yourself settle into this scene. The morning air carries the scent of wood smoke and rushes, the sweet smell of hay from the nearby barns, and the faint aroma of the Lord's breakfast still lingering from the kitchen. You can hear the gentle murmur of voices as other villagers gather, the soft creak of leather and wool as people shift nervously, and the distant sound of the Lord's hounds baying in their kennels. What many people don't realize about medieval manor courts is that they were far more sophisticated than simple exercises in feudal power. These courts, known as courts baron and courts leet, were essentially the backbone of local government, handling everything from property disputes to minor crimes, from trade regulations to marriage contracts. The lord who presided wasn't just a landowner. He was judge, administrator, and the living embodiment of royal authority in this small corner of England. As you enter the great hall, your eyes need a moment to adjust to the dim light. The walls are hung with tapestries that tell stories of hunting and harvest, their colors muted by age and smoke. The floor is covered with fresh rushes, replaced just yesterday for court day, and you can smell the herbs, sweet woodruff and meadowsweet, that have been scattered among them to keep the air fresh and to ward off the fleas that might otherwise disturb the proceedings. At the far end of the hall, elevated on a small platform, sits the Lord's chair. Not quite a throne, but certainly more elaborate than any other seat in the room. Lord Edmund de Ashford occupies it now, a man in his middle years with the weathered hands of someone who still works his own land when necessary. His clothing is fine but practical, good wool dyed with expensive colors, but cut in a style that won't hinder him if he needs to mount a horse or inspect a field. Here's something that might surprise you. Lord Edmund can't read or write. This wasn't unusual for even wealthy landowners of the time. Literacy was primarily the domain of clergy and professional scribes. But this doesn't make him ignorant. His memory is trained to hold vast amounts of information about land holdings, family histories, legal precedents, and the complex web of obligations that bind this community together. He knows every field boundary, every family relationship, and every tradition that governs life in his domain. Beside him sits Brother Marcus, the parish priest, who serves as the court's clerk and legal advisor. The priest's wooden writing desk holds several sheets of parchment, quill pens made from goose feathers, and a small pot of ink that he mixed himself from oak galls, iron, and wine. Every decision made here today will be carefully recorded, not just for immediate reference, but for future generations who might need to understand the precedents being set. The first case of the day involves a boundary dispute between two farmers, Walter and Geoffrey, whose families have been arguing over a strip of land for 3 generations. The disputed area is no larger than a modern garden, but in a world where survival depends on every acre, every rood, every perch of land, such disputes can tear communities apart if not handled carefully. Let your mind settle into the slow rhythm of medieval justice as the case unfolds. Walter steps forward first, his woolen cap clutched in his work-roughened hands. He speaks in the local dialect, his words thick with the accent of this particular region. But his argument is clear and methodical. He claims the land based on his grandfather's testimony, witnessed by men who are now dead, but whose sons remember their father's words. What's fascinating about this process is how it combines formal legal procedure with intimate community knowledge. The court doesn't just hear testimony, it examines the physical evidence of the land itself. The shape of the furrows, the placement of marker stones, even the types of weeds growing in disputed areas can tell stories about who has worked the land and for how long. Jeffrey presents his counterclaim with equal care, producing a piece of bark on which scratches have been carved, a primitive but legally valid record of the original division made by his great-uncle. The court examines this evidence with the same solemnity that a modern court might examine a contract, because in this world, such simple records carry the weight of law. As the testimony continues, you might find yourself growing drowsy in the warm, smoky atmosphere of the hall. The voices blend together in a soothing murmur, punctuated by the occasional crackle of the fire and the soft scratch of Brother Marcus's quill on parchment. The legal process moves at the pace of careful thought rather than hurried efficiency, and there's something deeply calming about this measured approach to justice. Lord Edmund listens to each argument with careful attention, occasionally asking questions that reveal his deep understanding of both the law and the people he governs. When Walter mentions that his grandfather planted a particular oak tree to mark the boundary, the Lord nods knowingly. He remembers that tree from his own childhood, when his father held court in this same hall. When Geoffrey speaks of the flooding that changed the course of the small stream that forms part of the boundary, the Lord recalls the same event, because he was there when it happened. This is the genius of the medieval manor court system. It combined written law with living memory, formal procedure with intimate knowledge of local conditions. The Lord wasn't just applying abstract legal principles. He was making decisions based on decades of personal observation and community wisdom passed down through generations. The resolution, when it comes, is both simple and elegant. The disputed strip will be divided equally between the two families, with each taking responsibility for maintaining the drainage ditch that runs along the new boundary. But more than that, the court orders that both families will work together during the next spring planting, sharing tools and labor to ensure that the newly divided land produces the best possible harvest. The punishment for their dispute is cooperation, a solution that strengthens rather than divides the community. As the morning progresses, other cases follow in gentle succession. A merchant accused of using false weights finds himself fined 3 silver pennies and ordered to have his scales checked monthly by the village reeve. A young woman seeking permission to marry outside the manor pays her merchet, a fee that acknowledges the Lord's loss of her labor and any children she might have produced for his domain. An elderly Katager requests permission to retire from his labor obligations, offering to train his grandson as his replacement. Each case reveals another layer of the complex social fabric that holds this medieval community together. The court isn't just about punishment. It's about maintaining the delicate balance of rights and obligations that allows everyone to survive and, hopefully, prosper within the constraints of feudal society. The noon bell rings from the church tower, its bronze voice carrying across the fields and through the manor's stone walls. The sound seems to hang in the air for a long moment, marking not just the passage of time, but the rhythm of life in this ancient world. Lord Edmund rises from his chair, and the court session comes to its quiet close. As the villagers file out of the hall, their business concluded for another month, you can hear the gentle murmur of conversation as neighbors discuss the day's decisions. There's no sense of drama or conflict, just the satisfied feeling that comes when community affairs have been handled with care and wisdom. The disputes have been resolved, the fees have been paid, and the social order has been maintained through the careful application of law and custom. Outside, the afternoon sun slants golden through the windows of the manor house, casting long shadows across the courtyard. You can hear the distant sound of the Lord's steward calling instructions to the kitchen servants, the gentle lowing of cattle in the nearby pasture, and the soft rustle of leaves in the ancient oak trees that shade the approach to the hall. The weight of the Lord's law has been applied with a gentle hand, and the community continues its slow, steady progression through the seasons of medieval life. You don't need to remember the details of each case. Just let the scene fade as the afternoon light grows softer and the shadows longer. The story moves on, carrying you deeper into the fascinating world of medieval justice, where every decision was made not in the abstract pursuit of legal principle, but in the very human effort to help a community of neighbors live together in peace and prosperity. The week following the manor court brings with it the blessed rhythm of market day, when the village square transforms from a quiet crossing of paths into a bustling hub of commerce and community life. You wake before dawn to the sound of wooden wheels rolling over cobblestones, the gentle lowing of cattle being driven to the livestock pens, and the cheerful calls of merchants setting up their stalls in the pre-dawn darkness. Market day in medieval England wasn't just about buying and selling. It was a carefully regulated institution that required royal permission, specific legal protections, and its own special form of justice. The market charter, granted by King Edward II some 30 years ago, hangs framed in the church vestry, its Latin words guaranteeing safe passage for all who come to trade, protection from arbitrary arrest, and swift justice for any disputes that might arise during the day's commerce. As you step out into the crisp morning air, you can already smell the wonderful mixture of scents that announces market day. Fresh bread from the bakers who've been working since midnight, the earthy smell of root vegetables still covered with soil, the sweet aroma of honey and beeswax, and the more complex fragrances of imported spices, cinnamon, pepper, and ginger, that have traveled hundreds of miles to reach this small English village. The market cross stands at the center of it all, its carved stone surface catching the first rays of sunlight. Around its base, the most privileged merchants have set up their stalls, those who've paid the highest fees and proven their trustworthiness over years of honest dealing. These aren't just local traders, but traveling merchants who follow a circuit of markets throughout the region, bringing goods and news from distant towns and cities. Let yourself settle into the gentle rhythm of this medieval morning. The wooden stalls creak softly as merchants arrange their wares. The voices of early customers blend in a soothing murmur. And somewhere in the distance, a fiddle player begins a slow, haunting melody that will continue throughout the day. There's something deeply peaceful about this ancient ritual of commerce, where everything moves at the pace of human conversation and careful negotiation. What many people don't realize is that medieval markets operated under their own special legal system, quite different from the manor court or royal justice. Market law was designed to be swift, fair, and conclusive, because merchants couldn't afford to have disputes drag on for weeks or months. The market court, presided over by the bailiff with his distinctive staff of office, could hear cases, render judgment, and execute punishment all within the span of a few hours. The bailiff today is Master Robert, a solid man in his 50s who's been overseeing market days for nearly 2 decades. His knowledge of weights and measures, fair pricing, and trade regulations is legendary throughout the county. More importantly, his reputation for fairness has made this village's market one of the most trusted in the region. Merchants will travel an extra day to trade here, knowing that their goods will be fairly evaluated and their disputes justly resolved. As the morning progresses and the market fills with customers, you witness the intricate dance of medieval commerce. Every transaction is a small negotiation, every price a careful balance between what the seller needs and what the buyer can afford. There are no fixed prices on most goods. Instead, there's the art of the deal, refined over centuries of practice and governed by unwritten rules of fairness that everyone understands. Near the cloth merchant's stall, you notice a small commotion developing. A customer, a well-dressed woman from a neighboring village, is examining a bolt of fine wool cloth with obvious dissatisfaction. She claims the merchant promised her wool of a particular quality and color, but what she's received is inferior, coarser in texture and duller in hue than what she expected for her daughter's wedding dress. The merchant, a thin man with ink-stained fingers from keeping his accounts, maintains that the cloth is exactly what was ordered. He produces a small piece of parchment on which the transaction was recorded, pointing to the marks that indicate the grade and color of the wool. But the customer shakes her head firmly, and soon a small crowd has gathered to observe the dispute. This is where the genius of market law reveals itself. Rather than allowing the argument to escalate or sending the parties away to return another day, Master Robert approaches with his staff of office. The crowd parts respectfully as he examines both the cloth and the written record. But here's what's fascinating. He doesn't just look at the evidence, he calls for witnesses. "Who here saw this cloth when it was first displayed?" he asks, and several hands rise. The medieval market was a thoroughly public space where most transactions were witnessed by multiple people. Privacy in commerce was almost unknown, and this transparency served as a powerful protection against fraud and deception. The witnesses, including two other cloth merchants who might be considered competitors, examine the disputed wool with professional expertise. They feel its texture, hold it up to the light to examine its weave, and even smell it to determine how it was processed. Their verdict is unanimous. The cloth is indeed inferior to what was originally shown, though whether this was intentional deception or honest mistake remains unclear. Here's where market mercy comes into play. Rather than imposing a harsh penalty, Master Robert proposes a solution that satisfies both honor and practical need. The merchant will provide the cloth of the promised quality at no additional charge, but the customer will also pay a small additional fee to compensate the merchant for his trouble in obtaining the better wool. More importantly, both parties will shake hands publicly, demonstrating that their dispute has been resolved without lasting animosity. This kind of creative problem-solving was typical of market justice. The goal wasn't to punish wrongdoing but to restore balance, maintain relationships, and keep commerce flowing smoothly. Both parties leave the negotiation feeling that they've been treated fairly, and other merchants take note that Master Robert's court can be trusted to find equitable solutions even in complex disputes. As the morning sun climbs higher, warming the market square and bringing out more customers, you might find yourself growing drowsy as you watch the gentle ebb and flow of medieval commerce. The sounds blend together in a soothing symphony. The clink of coins, the rustle of cloth, the soft conversations of neighbors greeting each other, and the underlying murmur of dozens of small negotiations happening simultaneously. The livestock market, set up in a field just beyond the main square, provides its own form of entertainment and occasional disputes. A farmer from 3 villages over has brought a cow that he claims is excellent for milk production, but the potential buyer suspects she's past her prime. The disagreement is resolved by the simple expedient of milking the cow on the spot. If she produces good milk readily, the sale proceeds at the agreed price. If not, the price is reduced accordingly. This practical approach to dispute resolution reveals another aspect of medieval market justice that often surprises modern people. Rather than relying purely on testimony or written evidence, medieval courts frequently used what we might call trial by demonstration. If a horse were claimed to be sound, it would be ridden. If ale was said to be of good quality, it would be tasted. If weights were disputed, they would be tested against standard measures kept in the church for exactly this purpose. The spice merchant, an exotic figure who's traveled all the way from London, draws curious crowds with his carefully guarded bundles of precious seasonings. Pepper, worth more than silver by weight, is measured out grain by grain. Cinnamon bark, carried by ship from distant Ceylon, is inspected carefully by customers who know that inferior bark can be disguised with aromatic oils. Even salt, that most basic of preservatives, comes in different grades and qualities that require expert evaluation. When a dispute arises over the quality of some imported ginger, a customer claims it's been adulterated with cheaper roots to increase its weight. The resolution is both simple and sophisticated. Master Robert calls for the village's most experienced cook, old grandmother Sarah, who's been seasoning food for over 60 years. She examines the ginger with her practiced eye, tastes a small portion, and renders her judgment. The ginger is pure, but it's from last year's harvest rather than this year's, making it less potent but still valuable. The price is adjusted accordingly, and both parties express satisfaction with this expert evaluation. The afternoon brings a different rhythm to the market as the serious business of the day gives way to more leisurely browsing and social interaction. Children who finish their morning chores come to spend their carefully saved pennies on small treats: honey cakes, wooden toys, or ribbons for their hair. Young couples walk together, perhaps shopping for items they'll need when they marry, their families watching approvingly from a respectful distance. As the shadows begin to lengthen, and the late afternoon light takes on that golden quality that seems to make everything glow with warmth, the market begins its slow transformation back into an ordinary village square. Merchants pack their unsold goods, sweep up the debris around their stalls, and settle their accounts with the bailiff. The fees collected during the day, stall rents, dispute resolution charges, and taxes on certain goods, will help maintain the market cross, repair the roads, and fund the next month's market preparations. The last transaction of the day involves a traveling tinker who repairs a farmer's damaged plow blade. The work is done in full view of everyone, the price negotiated fairly, and the payment made in small coins that gleam like copper stars in the fading light. There's something deeply satisfying about this final exchange. as if the day's commerce has reached its natural conclusion with this simple act of craftsmanship and fair dealing. As the market quiets and the evening mist begins to rise from the fields beyond the village, you can hear the church bells calling people to evening prayers. The merchants who live locally head home to their suppers, while the traveling traders prepare to spend the night at the village inn before continuing their circuit to the next market town. The square, which just hours ago bustled with commerce and conversation, settles into the peaceful quiet of another successfully completed market day. Let your mind drift now with the settling darkness, as the medieval world prepares for rest. The story of Market Day reminds us that even in the midst of commerce and potential conflict, medieval communities found ways to balance profit with mercy, justice with practical wisdom. As the last sounds of the day fade into the gentle silence of evening, we too can rest in the knowledge that fairness and community spirit have triumphed once again. 2 weeks have passed since the bustling energy of Market Day, and the village has settled into the quieter rhythm of late autumn. The leaves on the great oak by the church have turned the color of burnished copper, and there's a crisp edge to the morning air that speaks of winter's approach. But today brings something unusual, something that hasn't been seen in this village for nearly 3 years. Word has spread through the narrow lanes like morning mist. There will be an ordeal by water. The accused is Elena, a widow in her middle years who lives in a small cottage at the edge of the village. She's been charged with a crime that strikes at the very heart of medieval society: the theft of consecrated communion wafers from the church altar. It's not just theft, but sacrilege, a crime so serious that ordinary methods of justice seem inadequate. The evidence against her is circumstantial but troubling. She was seen near the church at an unusual hour. Crumbs of what appeared to be communion bread were found in her cottage, and several neighbors have testified to her desperate poverty and strange behavior since her husband's death last spring. As you walk toward the mill pond where the ordeal will take place, you can feel the weight of anticipation in the air. This isn't the everyday justice of the stocks or the practical resolution of market disputes. This is something far older, reaching back into the mists of Anglo-Saxon England, and even earlier, to times when the judgment of God was sought directly through sacred ritual. The mill pond lies in a quiet hollow beyond the village, where the stream that powers the grain mill widens into a deep, still pool. Ancient willows droop their branches into the dark water, and reeds whisper softly in the morning breeze. The setting has an almost otherworldly quality, as if this place exists at the boundary between the everyday world and the realm of divine judgment. What many people don't understand about trial by ordeal is that it wasn't a primitive form of torture or a crude test of guilt or innocence. Rather, it was a carefully regulated religious ceremony, conducted according to ancient traditions and overseen by the church itself. The belief wasn't that the ordeal would magically reveal the truth, but that God would intervene to protect the innocent and allow the guilty to be revealed through natural means. Brother Marcus, the parish priest, arrives carrying a leather satchel containing the items necessary for the ritual. His face is solemn but not harsh. He's performed this ceremony only twice before in his 15 years of service, and he approaches it with the gravity appropriate to such a serious invocation of divine judgment. With him comes Father Benedict from the abbey 10 miles distant, a man learned in both law and theology, whose presence is required for any ordeal to be considered legitimate. The preparation for the ordeal is as important as the ritual itself. Elena has spent the past 3 days in prayer and fasting, attended by the village women who've ensured that she's spiritually prepared for whatever judgment may come. Her confessor has heard her final confession, she's received the holy sacraments, and she's been examined by the church authorities to ensure that she understands the gravity of what she's about to undergo. Let yourself settle into the hushed atmosphere surrounding the pond. The water is perfectly still, reflecting the gray autumn sky like a mirror. You can hear the soft murmur of prayers being recited, the gentle rustle of ceremonial robes, and the distant sound of the mill wheel turning in its endless cycle. There's something deeply peaceful about this moment of preparation, as if time itself has slowed to allow for proper contemplation of justice and divine will. The crowd that has gathered is surprisingly small, perhaps 30 people, all of whom have some direct connection to the case or the accused. Trial by ordeal wasn't public entertainment in the way that some other medieval punishments could be. It was a sacred ritual that demanded respect and solemnity from all who witnessed it. Children have been kept away, and even among the adults present, voices are kept to hushed whispers. Father Benedict begins the ceremony with a blessing of the water itself, sprinkling holy water from his blessed chalice into the pond while reciting prayers in Latin. The words echo across the still surface. Adjuro te aqua per eum cati fecit. I adjure you, water, by him who made you. The prayer is ancient, its origins lost in the mists of early Christianity, but its purpose is clear: to consecrate this natural element as an instrument of divine judgment. Here's something that might surprise you about the ordeal by water. There were actually two different versions, and the choice between them often revealed as much about the case as the ordeal itself. The more common version, known as ordeal by cold water, involved binding the accused and lowering them into blessed water. If they floated, it was considered a sign of guilt, the pure water rejecting the impure soul. If they sank, they were considered innocent, though obviously they needed to be quickly pulled to safety. But Elena faces the less common ordeal by hot water, reserved for the most serious religious crimes. A large iron cauldron has been set up near the pond's edge, and a fire burns beneath it, heating the water to near boiling. The test will require Elena to reach into this scalding water and retrieve a small stone from the bottom. Her hand will then be bound and examined after 3 days. If it heals cleanly, she'll be judged innocent. If it shows signs of infection or fails to heal properly, guilt will be assumed. The psychological aspect of this ordeal is as important as the physical. Elena has had 3 days to contemplate her situation, to pray for divine intervention, and, if she is guilty, to consider confession as an alternative to the ordeal. The medieval church much preferred confession and penance to trial by ordeal, and many cases were resolved when the accused chose to admit guilt rather than face divine judgment. As the water in the cauldron begins to bubble and steam rises into the cool morning air, you might find yourself growing drowsy as you watch this ancient ritual unfold. The flames beneath the cauldron dance hypnotically, the steam creates shifting patterns in the autumn light, and the rhythmic chanting of the priests has a soothing, meditative quality that seems to slow time itself. Elena stands quietly beside the pond, flanked by 2 village women who serve as her supporters and witnesses. Her face is pale but calm, and she clutches a small wooden cross that belonged to her late husband. She's dressed in a simple white shift, the color of purity and innocence, and her graying hair is covered with a plain linen veil. There's a dignity about her bearing that speaks well of her character, regardless of the accusations she faces. The moment of truth approaches as Father Benedict tests the water temperature with a long iron rod. The water is now hot enough that steam rises continuously from its surface, but not so hot as to cause immediate and severe injury. The temperature is carefully calibrated, hot enough to cause pain and potential harm to the guilty, but survivable for someone whose cause is just and who enjoys divine protection. What's remarkable about this moment is the complete faith that everyone present has in the process. This isn't skeptical modern justice looking for evidence and proof. This is a community united in the belief that God will not allow an innocent person to suffer unjustly. Even Elena herself seems to draw strength from this collective faith, standing straighter as the moment of testing approaches. The stone that Elena must retrieve is small and smooth, about the size of a robin's egg. It's been blessed by both priests and placed carefully in the center of the cauldron where the water is deepest and hottest. The task requires her to submerge her entire hand and forearm to reach it. No quick grabbing motion will suffice. Father Benedict offers Elena one final opportunity to confess, reminding her gently that God's mercy is infinite for those who truly repent. But Elena shakes her head quietly, speaking her first words of the day. I am innocent of this crime, and I trust in God's justice to reveal the truth. Her voice is steady, without tremor or doubt, and several people in the crowd nod approvingly at her dignity and faith. The actual ordeal, when it comes, is over in moments. Elena approaches the cauldron with steady steps, kneels beside it, and offers a brief, silent prayer. Then, without hesitation, she plunges her right hand into the scalding water. There's a sharp intake of breath from the watchers, but Elena makes no sound. She grasps the stone firmly and withdraws her hand in one smooth motion, holding the retrieved stone up for all to see. Brother Marcus immediately wraps Elena's hand in clean linen blessed with holy oil, and the first phase of the ordeal is complete. Now comes the waiting, 3 days during which Elena will remain in the care of the church, her hand examined daily for signs of healing or infection. The entire village will hold its breath during this time, knowing that the final judgment rests not in human hands, but in the divine will that governs all things. As the crowd begins to disperse quietly, You can hear the gentle lapping of water against the pond's edge, the soft conversation of neighbors discussing what they've witnessed, and the distant sound of the church bell calling people to morning prayers. The ordeal by water is over, but its ultimate resolution lies 3 days in the future, when Elena's hand will be unwrapped and examined for the signs that will determine her fate. The water seems to hold its breath, just as you might now, as this ancient drama reaches its pause. In 3 days, the village will know whether God has chosen to protect the innocent or reveal the guilty through this most solemn of medieval trials. But for now, in this moment of suspended judgment, all that remains is faith, hope, and the quiet confidence that justice, whether human or divine, will ultimately prevail. Let your mind drift now with the mist rising from the sacred pond, as the medieval world continues its slow dance between earthly law and heavenly judgment. The story carries on, but like Elena's wrapped hand, some truths require time and patience to be fully revealed. The morning mist clings to the village lanes as you follow the rhythmic sound echoing through the dawn air. Clang, clang, clang. Each strike of hammer on anvil marks time like a slow, steady heartbeat. Your feet carry you down the cobbled path toward the blacksmith's forge, where sparks dance lazily in the dim light. The forge glows like a small sun in the darkness of the workshop. You can feel the warmth radiating from the hearth even before you step inside, chasing away the morning chill that settles in your bones. The blacksmith, a broad-shouldered man with arms like tree trunks, works at his craft with the patience of someone who has shaped iron for decades. His movements are slow, deliberate, almost meditative. Clang, pause, clang. You watch as he heats a length of iron in the glowing coals, the metal turning from dull gray to cherry red to brilliant orange. The bellows wheeze softly as his apprentice pumps air into the fire, and you can smell the earthy scent of burning charcoal mixed with the metallic tang of hot iron. There's something deeply peaceful about this ancient rhythm, this dance between fire and metal that has continued unchanged for centuries. The blacksmith is crafting shackles today, not the brutal chains of punishment, but the simple iron bands used to secure doors and gates. In this medieval world, even the tools of restraint are made with care and craft. His hammer falls with practiced precision, each blow shaping the metal just so. You notice how he pauses between strikes, examining his work, ensuring each curve and bend serves its purpose. As you stand in the doorway, the warmth of the forge makes your eyelids heavy. The apprentice tends the fire with a long-handled poker, stirring the coals until they pulse like breathing embers. Orange light flickers across the stone walls, casting dancing shadows that seem to sway with your drowsiness. The steady clang, clang, clang becomes a lullaby, each strike softer than the last in your ears. The blacksmith speaks little, but when he does, his voice is gravelly and kind. He explains to his apprentice how the iron must be heated just so. Not too hot, lest it become brittle, not too cool, lest it resist the hammer's persuasion. There's wisdom in his words, earned through years of watching metal bend to his will. You find yourself nodding along, though your thoughts grow fuzzy around the edges. Through the open doorway, you can see other villagers beginning their daily routines. A baker's boy hurries past with a basket of fresh loaves, their crusts golden in the morning light. A milkmaid leads her cow down the lane, the animal's bell tinkling softly with each step. The village is waking slowly, like a person stretching after a long, restful sleep. Clang, clang. The blacksmith's work supports more than just daily life. It upholds the very structure of medieval justice. The stocks in the village square, the chains for the pillory, the locks on the manor house doors, all emerge from this humble forge. Yet there's no malice in the craft, only the quiet dedication of a man who shapes iron as surely as time shapes stone. As the sun climbs higher, casting longer rays through the workshop's small windows, you feel yourself growing drowsy in the warm air. The sparks from the anvil seem to float more slowly, like tiny stars drifting through honey. Your breathing begins to match the rhythm of the bellows. In, out. The apprentice banks the fire for a moment's rest, and in the sudden quiet, you can hear the distant sounds of the village stirring to life. A church bell tolls the hour, 7 rings that seem to echo in your chest. Somewhere, a rooster crows, though his call sounds muffled and far away. You don't need to remember every detail of the blacksmith's work. Just let the warmth of the forge seep into your bones. Let the rhythm of the hammer carry you like a gentle current. As the sparks faded into the morning air, another tale began to unfold in the sleepy village. Your feet carry you slowly toward the village center, where a small crowd has gathered near the old oak tree. The morning air is cool against your face, carrying the scent of dew-dampened earth and the faint aroma of bread baking in distant ovens. You can hear the soft murmur of voices ahead, not angry or hostile, but curious, almost conversational. As you approach, you see the pillory standing in its familiar place beside the church steps. It's a simple wooden contraption, weathered gray by countless seasons, with holes cut for head and hands. Today, it holds Thomas the merchant, a portly man whose face shows more embarrassment than pain. His crime, announced on a small wooden sign hung around his neck, was using false weights to cheat his customers of grain. The crowd that has gathered is neither large nor cruel. Perhaps 24 villagers stand in a loose circle, some holding children who point and whisper questions. Goodwife Martha tends her knitting, needles clicking softly as she works and watches. Old Willem leans on his walking stick, occasionally shaking his head with the wisdom of someone who has seen many such displays over the years. Thomas himself seems resigned rather than defiant. Sweat beads on his forehead despite the cool morning air, but his expression holds the weariness of someone who knows he has brought this upon himself. When young Peter asks his mother why the merchant is trapped in the wooden frame, she explains in patient, measured tones about honesty in trade and the importance of fair dealing. "When we buy grain from Thomas," she says, her voice carrying easily in the still air, "we must trust that his scales speak true. When that trust is broken, the whole village suffers." Her words are not harsh, but they carry the weight of community wisdom passed down through generations. A light breeze stirs the oak's branches overhead, causing dappled shadows to dance across the pillory and the cobblestones below. The leaves rustle with a sound like gentle rain, and you find the rhythm soothing. Some of the smaller children grow bored with the spectacle and begin playing a quiet game of stones nearby, their laughter soft and musical. The village priest emerges from the church, his brown robes rustling as he approaches the pillory. His face shows no anger, only the patient concern of a shepherd tending his flock. He speaks quietly with Thomas, words too low for you to hear, but you can see the merchant's shoulders relax slightly. There is forgiveness available here, alongside justice. As the morning progresses, the crowd begins to thin. People have work to attend to, bread to bake, fields to tend, children to mind. The excitement, such as it was, has given way to the ordinary rhythms of village life. A cat stretches lazily in a patch of sunlight, then settles down for a nap against the warm stone of the church wall. You notice how the pillory, for all its purpose as punishment, has become simply another part of the village landscape. Children use its base as a resting spot when they're tired from play. Birds sometimes perch on its wooden frame, chirping their morning songs. Even now, with Thomas confined within it, there's nothing particularly fearsome about the structure. It's just wood and iron, doing its slow work of teaching lessons about community trust. The sun climbs higher, warming your face and making your eyelids heavy. The murmur of remaining conversations becomes a gentle background hum, like bees working in a distant meadow. Thomas shifts occasionally in his constraints, but even his movements seem to be settling into a rhythm, a slow acceptance of his temporary fate. Goodwife Martha finishes a row of her knitting and looks up at the sky, judging the hour by the sun's position. "Not much longer now," she says to no one in particular, her voice kind. Even punishment here has its measured time, its beginning and its end. You find yourself growing drowsy in the warm morning light, lulled by the peaceful nature of this medieval justice. Let your mind drift as the village settles into its daily routine. As the shadows grow shorter and the sounds grow softer, your path leads you away from the village, following a worn dirt road that winds through fields of barley and rye. The monastery sits on a gentle hill about a mile from the village proper, its stone walls rising gray and solid against the morning sky. As you approach, the world seems to grow quieter, as if the very air here has been taught to whisper. Brother Francis greets you at the gate with a gentle nod. His brown habit is patched but clean, and his face bears the peaceful expression of a man who has found his calling. He speaks little. The rule of silence is strong here, but his gestures are welcoming as he leads you into the cloister. The monastery's central courtyard is a perfect square of tranquility. Covered walkways line all four sides, their stone arches creating a rhythm of light and shadow that seems to pulse with your heartbeat. In the center, a small garden grows herbs for the infirmary, lavender, sage, chamomile, their scents mixing in the still air like a natural incense. You follow Brother Francis along the walkway, your footsteps echoing softly off the vaulted ceiling. The sound seems to multiply and fade, creating a gentle percussion that accompanies your slow progress. Through the arches, you glimpse monks at their daily tasks. One copying manuscripts in the scriptorium, another tending the vegetables in the kitchen garden, a third walking slowly while reading from a small prayer book. The discipline here is different from the village's public punishments. When monks transgress against their vows, their correction comes through prayer, fasting, and additional labor. Brother Francis points to a monk kneeling in the chapel, his lips moving silently in prayer. He has been there since dawn, seeking forgiveness for the sin of speaking harshly to a novice during yesterday's lessons. In the scriptorium, you pause to watch Brother Augustine work at his copying. His hand moves across the parchment with practiced precision, each letter formed with the care of someone who knows his work will outlast his earthly life. The scratch of his quill on the page is rhythmic, almost musical. When he makes an error, he carefully scrapes it away with a small knife, then continues without frustration or haste. The sound of bells draws your attention, not the heavy bronze bells of the church, but smaller silver chimes that mark the hours of prayer. Their tone is pure and sweet, seeming to hang in the air like visible threads of sound. Brother Francis bows his head at the sound, and you find yourself doing the same, drawn into the rhythm of monastic life. Through an open doorway, you glimpse the refectory where the monks will soon gather for their simple meal. Long wooden tables stand ready, with bowls and cups placed with mathematical precision. There will be no talking during the meal, only the sounds of eating and the voice of one brother reading aloud from the scriptures. Even their nourishment is an act of discipline and devotion. The monastery's library draws you deeper into its quiet halls. Here, thousands of books rest on wooden shelves, their leather bindings worn smooth by countless hands. The air smells of parchment and beeswax, old leather, and the faint residue of countless candles burned during long hours of study. A few monks work silently at reading tables, their faces illuminated by pools of light from high windows. Brother Francis shows you a curious sight, a small cell where Brother Marcus sits in contemplation. Yesterday, he was caught sneaking extra bread from the kitchen, a violation of the vow of temperance. His punishment is a day of fasting and meditation, sitting in silence while contemplating the virtue of moderation. His face shows no resentment, only a peaceful acceptance of the discipline that will strengthen his spiritual resolve. The afternoon light slants through the windows, casting long rectangles of golden warmth across the stone floors. Dust motes dance lazily in the beams, rising and falling like tiny spirits. The very light here seems different from the outside world, softer, more contemplative, as if it too has taken vows of serenity. In the garden, you watch an elderly monk tending the beehives. His movements are slow and deliberate, and the bees seem to sense his calm nature. They buzz around him without aggression, some even landing on his hands as he works. The sound of their wings creates a drowsy drone that makes your eyelids heavy. A novice passes by, carrying a pitcher of water. His steps are measured, each one a small act of mindfulness. When he stumbles slightly on an uneven stone, he pauses, bows his head briefly in what might be a prayer for greater attention, then continues on his way. Even small mistakes here become opportunities for spiritual growth. The bells chime again, the call to Vespers, the evening prayer. The monks begin to gather, moving like brown-robed shadows through the corridors. Their feet make almost no sound on the stone floors, as if they've learned to walk on air itself. You follow at a distance, drawn by the promise of their ancient songs. As the candles are lit in the chapel and the first notes of plainsong begin to rise, you feel your own spirit settling into the monastery's rhythm of peace. Let your breathing slow to match the measured cadence of their prayers. Let the weight of the world dissolve in this sanctuary of silence. As the candles burned low and the monks' voices faded into whispered prayers, another story emerged from the medieval night. The tranquil evening is suddenly broken by distant shouts echoing across the fields. "Stop thief! Stop thief!" The cry carries on the still air, growing louder as more voices join the call. But even this commotion has a dreamlike quality in the fading light, like an echo from another world entirely. You find yourself drawn toward the sound, your feet carrying you down the monastery hill toward whatever drama unfolds in the village below. The sun hangs low on the horizon, painting the sky in gentle shades of amber and rose. Long shadows stretch across the meadows, and the air holds that particular stillness that comes just before nightfall. It's the kind of evening that usually brings peace to the countryside, when farmers return from their fields and families gather around their hearths. But tonight, the ancient ritual of justice stirs the village from its quiet routine. You emerge from the monastery grounds to see torches flickering along the road, leading back to the village. The lights bob and weave like fireflies as the pursuers make their way through the gathering dusk. Their shouts have settled into a rhythmic chant. Hue and cry, hue and cry, the ancient call that compels every able-bodied person to join the pursuit of a criminal. The words themselves are old, dating back to Norman times, when hue meant outcry and cry meant the call to arms. The thief, you learn from the excited whispers of passing villagers, has made off with a leather purse from the Red Lion Tavern during the evening meal. Not a violent crime, but theft nonetheless, and the law requires that the entire community respond. It's an obligation as old as the village itself. When the hue and cry is raised, every person between the ages of 15 and 60 must join the pursuit or face punishment themselves for neglecting their civic duty. You watch from a gentle rise as villagers emerge from their cottages like moths drawn to flame. Goodwife Martha appears in her doorway, hastily wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Old Willem hobbles out with his walking stick, determined to do his part despite his age. Even young Peter, barely old enough to be included, carries a small oil lamp that casts dancing shadows on his excited face. But there's something almost theatrical about the scene, as if the villagers are performing roles in an ancient play rather than pursuing a real criminal. Their movements lack the urgency you might expect. Instead, they gather with the patient resignation of people fulfilling an old obligation, like attending church on Sunday or paying their taxes to the lord of the manor. Young Tom Miller leads the pursuit, his voice clear and strong as he calls out directions. He went toward the river, he shouts, pointing his torch toward the dark line of trees that marks the water's course. The crowd follows, but their pace is unhurried, almost ceremonial. They know, from experience passed down through generations, that most thieves, when faced with the hue and cry, simply surrender rather than face the entire community's wrath. The torchlight creates dancing shadows as the group moves through the fields. Children too young to officially participate follow at the edges, their voices adding to the chorus of calls. There, by the old mill, someone shouts, though you can see nothing in the darkness beyond the flickering circle of light. The cry is taken up by others, passed from voice to voice like a song in rounds. As you join the slow procession, you notice how the hue and cry serves purposes beyond simple law enforcement. Neighbors who rarely speak exchange quiet words as they walk. Young couples find excuses to walk closer together in the darkness. Old grievances are temporarily set aside in the face of community duty. The pursuit becomes a form of village bonding, a reminder that they are all part of something larger than their individual concerns. The village blacksmith appears, still wearing his leather apron, carrying a torch that burns brighter than the others. His presence lends gravity to the proceedings. Everyone knows that if the thief is caught, it may be the blacksmith who forges whatever restraints are needed. But even he moves with the measured pace of the group, his heavy boots keeping time with the general rhythm of the pursuit. A dog barks somewhere in the distance, then another, and soon a chorus of village dogs joins the human voices. Their howls rise and fall like waves, adding in primitive music to the night. Some of the pursuing villagers hush their own dogs, while others let them add their voices to the ancient call. The sound carries across the countryside, alerting other villages that justice is abroad in the land. The miller's wife appears at her cottage door as the group passes, wiping flour-dusty hands on her apron. "What's he taken?" she calls out, her voice more curious than concerned. When told it's a purse from the tavern, she nods knowingly. "Likely young Edward," she says, referring to a ne'er-do-well from the next village who's been seen lurking about lately. "He'll be hiding by the old willow, mark my words." The prediction proves accurate. As the group approaches the river, their torches illuminating the path through the reeds, a voice calls out from the darkness. "I surrender. I surrender." The words carry a note of relief rather than fear. Edward emerges from his hiding place behind the ancient willow tree, the stolen purse held high above his head like a flag of truce. The capture, when it comes, is almost anticlimactic. The thief is a thin young man with frightened eyes, his clothes damp from hiding in the riverside marsh. He offers no resistance as several of the men take hold of his arms. The purse is returned to its owner, a traveling merchant who counts its contents by torchlight and pronounces everything accounted for. "Please," Edward says, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've children at home. I meant no real harm." The plea hangs in the night air, and you can see the villagers exchanging glances in the flickering light. Justice must be served, but mercy has its place too in this medieval world. The discussion that follows is conducted in hushed tones, the participants forming a loose circle around the captured thief. The village priest appears, having been summoned by one of the children who ran ahead. His presence changes the tenor of the gathering, adding the weight of moral authority to the proceedings. He speaks quietly with Edward, his words too low to overhear, but you can see the young man's shoulders shake with what might be relief or remorse. Old Willem, despite his age and the lateness of the hour, takes his role as elder seriously. "What's to be done with him?" he asks, though his tone suggests he already knows the answer. The punishment for petty theft is well established. A day in the stocks, perhaps, or a fine if the culprit can pay it. Nothing brutal or permanent, just enough to teach a lesson and satisfy the community's sense of justice. The torches begin to burn lower as the group discusses Edward's fate. Some flames gutter and die, leaving their bearers in the warm glow cast by others. The night air grows cooler, carrying the scent of the river and the earthy smell of the marshland. An owl calls from somewhere across the water, its voice low and haunting. As the decision is reached, Edward will spend tomorrow in the stocks and pay a fine of 6 pence to the merchant. The crowd begins to disperse. The dramatic pursuit has ended not with violence or vengeance, but with the quiet satisfaction of duty fulfilled. The hue and cry has served its purpose, bringing the community together in defense of order and property. You watch as families drift away toward their cottages, children yawning as they walk, adults speaking in quiet voices about tomorrow's work. The torches create moving pools of light that gradually separate and fade, like stars going out one by one. Edward is led away by two of the village men, not roughly but firmly, to spend the night in the modest jail beneath the manor house. The excitement of the evening settles into memory as you follow the last stragglers back toward the village. The hue and cry, with all its ancient ceremony and community obligation, becomes just another story to be told by the fire on cold winter nights. Your footsteps crunch softly on the gravel path, and the sound mingles with the distant murmur of the river and the settling sounds of a village returning to sleep. As the last torch disappears around a bend in the road, you're left alone with the night. The stars emerge more clearly now, freed from competition with the earthly flames. A gentle breeze stirs the grass beside the path, creating a whispered lullaby that seems to encourage rest. Your eyelids grow heavy as you walk, lulled by the rhythm of your own footsteps and the peaceful conclusion to the evening's drama. You may be drifting now, as the village grows quiet once again, letting the ancient rhythms of justice and mercy carry you like a gentle current towards sleep. As the night settled over the medieval countryside, another tale began to unfold in the dreams of the drowsy village. The autumn air carries a different quality now, crisp and golden like the leaves that drift lazily from the great oak in the village square. 3 weeks have passed since the hue and cry, and the incident with young Edward has faded into the comfortable rhythm of village memory. The stocks where he spent his day of shame now stand empty, weathered with warming in the gentle afternoon sun. Today, the village prepares for something far more joyous: the harvest festival that marks the end of another growing season. You wake to the sound of laughter drifting through your cottage window, mixed with the creak of cart wheels and the lowing of cattle being driven to market. The harvest is complete, the grain safely stored in the Lord's barns and the villagers' own modest larders. The anxiety that grips farming communities through the growing season. Will there be enough rain? Will the crops survive the storms? Will the harvest feed everyone through the winter? Has given way to relief and celebration. Outside, the village square buzzes with preparations that have been weeks in the making. Long trestle tables appear as if by magic, carried from the manor house by willing hands. Goodwife Martha directs the arrangement with the authority of someone who has overseen many such gatherings, her voice carrying clearly across the square as she instructs where each table should go. Not there, young Peter. The ale will spill if we put it too close to the dancing area. The scent of roasting meat begins to fill the air as the great fire pit in the center of the square comes to life. Master Hugh the butcher tends a whole pig that turns slowly on an iron spit, the fat crackling and hissing as it drips into the flames below. The sound is almost musical, a gentle percussion that accompanies the bustle of preparation. Beside him, his apprentice turns a haunch of beef, both men working with the patient skill of those who understand that good food cannot be rushed. Children dart between the adults' legs like quick shadows, their excitement barely contained. Little Mary carries bundles of late flowers, golden marigolds and purple asters, that will decorate the tables. Young Thomas helps his father arrange barrels of ale in the shade of the church wall, each cask marked with symbols that indicate its strength and flavor. Even the village dogs seem to sense the festive atmosphere, their tails wagging as they follow the scent of cooking meat and dropped scraps. As the afternoon progresses, you find yourself drawn into the gentle current of preparation. There's something deeply satisfying about the communal effort, hands working together toward a shared goal of celebration and thanksgiving. The Harvest Festival isn't just about the food and drink, though there will be plenty of both. It's about the bonds that hold the community together, the shared relief that another year has passed without famine or disaster. The village baker emerges from his shop carrying tray after tray of special breads baked just for the festival. Golden loaves shaped like wheat sheaves, sweet rolls studded with dried fruit, and great round wheels of dark bread that will soak up the meat juices. The aroma mingles with the wood smoke and roasting meat, creating a perfume that makes your stomach rumble with anticipation. Old Willem appears, moving slowly but determinately toward the square. In his gnarled hands, he carries a wooden flute worn smooth by decades of use. Tonight, he will provide the music for dancing, as he has done for more harvest festivals than anyone can remember. His fingers, stiff with age, still remember the ancient melodies that have accompanied village celebrations since time immemorial. The manor house contributes its share to the feast. Lord Robert's steward arrives with servants carrying flagons of wine from the Lord's private cellar, a gesture of noblesse oblige that reinforces the social bonds between ruler and ruled. The wine is precious, imported from distant vineyards, and its presence at the village feast speaks to traditions of reciprocal obligation that run deeper than mere law. As the sun begins its descent toward the western hills, the first families start to gather in the square. They come carrying wooden bowls and horn cups, their finest clothes clean and mended for the occasion. The clothing isn't rich. These are farmers and craftsmen, not nobles, but everything has been carefully prepared. Wool dresses shake free of mothballs, leather jerkins receive a final oiling, and children's faces shine from vigorous scrubbing. The village priest appears at the church door, his brown robes exchanged for festival vestments that catch the light. Before the eating and drinking begin, there will be prayers of thanksgiving, acknowledgement that the harvest comes by God's grace as much as human toil. His presence lends a sacred quality to the gathering, reminding everyone that celebration and gratitude walk hand in hand. The first barrel of ale is tapped with ceremony, Master Geoffrey the brewer wielding the wooden mallet with the precision of long practice. The golden liquid flows into waiting pitchers, its foam catching the last rays of sunlight. A cheer goes up from the assembled villagers, not loud or raucous, but warm and heartfelt. The festival has officially begun. You accept a wooden cup of ale from Master Geoffrey's own hand, the brew cool and smooth with just enough bitterness to balance the sweetness. The barley that made this ale grew in the very fields you've walked past countless times, tended by the same hands that now raise cups in celebration. There's something profound in this connection between land and sustenance, between community effort and shared reward. The meat is declared ready as the sun touches the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep orange and purple. Master Hugh carves with ceremonial care, the first portions going to the village elders and the priest. Then families line up in order of precedence. Not strict hierarchy, but the gentle acknowledgement of social order that keeps rural communities functioning. Everyone will eat well tonight. The question is merely the order of service. As darkness settles over the village, torches are lit around the perimeter of the square. Their flames dance in the evening breeze, casting moving shadows that make the gathering feel almost otherworldly. The conversation grows louder as the ale does its work, voices mixing in the comfortable buzz of neighbors enjoying each other's company. Old Willem raises his flute to his lips, and the first notes of a dance tune float across the square. It's a melody worn smooth by repetition, simple enough that even children can follow its rhythm. Young couples begin to move toward the cleared area in front of the church, their movements tentative at first, then growing bolder as muscle memory takes over. The dancing that follows isn't the elaborate courtly entertainment of the manor house, but something far older and more fundamental. These are the dances of the common people, passed down through generations like stories or recipes. Circles form and break apart, lines of dancers weave between each other. Hands join and separate in patterns that mirror the agricultural cycles that govern village life. You find yourself drawn into the movement almost without conscious thought. A work-roughened hand takes yours, pulling you into a line of dancers that snakes around the square. The steps are simple, forward and back, turn and bow, but the rhythm is infectious. Your feet remember movements your mind never learned, as if the dances are written into the very stones of the village square. Between dances, there are stories told by the fire, tales of previous harvests and festivals that have passed into village legend. Master Thomas tells about the harvest festival of 15 years ago, when a thunderstorm drove everyone into the church but couldn't dampen their spirits. The story grows in the telling, as such stories do, until the rain becomes a deluge and the celebration inside the church sounds more magnificent than any feast in a royal hall. The children, fed and tired, begin to curl up on blankets beside the walls, their eyelids growing heavy despite the excitement around them. Their parents continue the celebration in lowered voices, the festivities gradually shifting from exuberant to contemplative as the night deepens. A second barrel of ale is opened, this one stronger than the first, reserved for the later hours when only the most dedicated celebrants remain. The conversation becomes more philosophical, touching on subjects that rarely surface during the practical demands of daily life. What makes a good harvest? What debts do neighbors owe each other? How should justice be balanced with mercy? The memory of Edward's recent punishment surfaces naturally in the conversation, but without rancor or judgment. The young thief has paid his debt to the community and been welcomed back into the fold. Tonight's celebration is proof that justice, when properly administered, heals rather than divides. The stocks stand empty in the shadows beyond the torchlight, a reminder of law's necessity, but not its dominance over community life. As the evening wears on, the music becomes softer, more intimate. Old Willem switches from dance tunes to lullabies, melodies that seem to encourage reflection rather than movement. Couples sit closer together on the wooden benches, children sleep in their parents' arms, and the conversation drops to murmurs barely audible above the crackling of the fire. The harvest moon rises full and golden, casting silver light across the village square and making the torch flames seem pale by comparison. Its presence feels like a benediction, nature's own acknowledgement of the successful completion of another agricultural cycle. Under its light, the medieval world seems timeless, connected to all the harvest festivals that have come before and all that will follow. You find yourself growing drowsy in the warm circle of firelight, lulled by the gentle conversation and the distant sound of old Willem's flute. The ale has made your limbs heavy, your thoughts soft around the edges. The harvest festival continues around you, but at a pace that seems to match your slowing heartbeat. As the music faded and the embers dimmed to glowing coals, you felt the peaceful weight of community celebration settling over you like a warm blanket. The harvest was gathered, justice was served, and the bonds that held the village together had been renewed for another year. Sleep came easily in such contentment, carrying you forward to whatever medieval dreams awaited. The November air carries a sharp edge now, cutting through your woolen cloak as you make your way toward the village center. Frost glitters on the cobblestones in the early morning light, and your breath forms small clouds that dissipate quickly in the crisp atmosphere. The harvest festival seems like a distant memory, though barely a month has passed. Winter is approaching with its own stern lessons, and today brings a sobering reminder that some crimes require more than a day in the stocks or a fine of silver coins. The summons came at dawn, a boy running from cottage to cottage with word that the king's justice has arrived to hear the case of William Blackwood, caught for the third time stealing grain from the miller's stores. 3 times caught, 3 times convicted. Under the ancient laws that govern this medieval realm, a third conviction for theft carries consequences far more severe than public humiliation or monetary payment. Today, William will receive the brand that marks him forever as a thief. You join the stream of villagers walking toward the manor house, their faces grave in the morning light. This is not like the festive gathering for Edward's capture or the communal celebration of the harvest. Today's business is necessary but solemn, the kind of justice that weighs heavy on everyone involved. Children walk quietly beside their parents, sensing the adult mood even if they don't fully understand its cause. The manor courtyard fills slowly as people arrive from the village and surrounding farms. Lord Robert has provided benches for the elderly, but most stand in loose groups, speaking in hushed tones about William's fate. You recognize many faces from happier gatherings. Goodwife Martha clutches her shawl tight against the cold, Master Hugh the Butcher stands with arms crossed, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. Even old Willem has made the journey, leaning heavily on his walking stick, but determined to witness this application of the king's law. The king's justice is a tall, severe man dressed in black robes trimmed with ermine. He arrived yesterday evening with a small retinue, a clerk to record the proceedings, 2 guards to maintain order, and the executioner who will carry out whatever sentence is pronounced. His presence transforms the familiar manor courtyard into something resembling a royal court, complete with formal procedures that seem oddly out of place in this rural setting. William Blackwood stands between 2 guards, his hands bound with rough rope. He's a thin man in his middle years, his face showing the effects of a hard life and harder choices. His clothes are patched and worn, speaking to the poverty that may have driven him to repeated theft. But the law makes no allowances for desperation. 3 convictions mean the brand, regardless of circumstances. His wife and 2 young children stand at the edge of the crowd, their faces pale with dread. The proceedings begin with formal ritual. The clerk unrolls a parchment scroll and reads the charges in Latin, then repeats them in the common tongue for the benefit of the assembled villagers. William's crimes are detailed with legal precision. 1 bushel of wheat taken in midsummer, 2 measures of barley stolen in early autumn, and finally the sack of rye that led to his current predicament. Each theft carefully documented, each conviction properly recorded. Lord Robert speaks on William's behalf, as is his right as the local lord. His words are carefully chosen, acknowledging the man's guilt while emphasizing his role as a father and his previous good service during the harvest seasons. The king's justice listens impassively, occasionally nodding but offering no indication of how the plea affects him. This is royal justice, formal and inflexible, quite different from the village's more personal approach to keeping order. The sentence, when it comes, surprises no one. William will be branded on the right thumb with the letter T for thief, marking him permanently so that any future judge will know his history at a glance. It's a punishment that carries both immediate pain and lifelong consequence. He'll bear this mark until the day he dies, a constant reminder of his crimes and a warning to others who might consider similar choices. The brazier is already glowing in the courtyard center, tended by the executioner's assistant who feeds charcoal to the flames with practiced care. The branding iron rests among the coals, its metal tip heated to the cherry-red color that will ensure a clear, permanent mark. The smell of burning charcoal mixes with the morning air, creating an acrid atmosphere that makes several of the watching children cough and press closer to their parents. William's composure finally breaks as he's led toward the brazier. His shoulders shake, and you can hear him whispering what might be prayers or simply desperate pleas for mercy. His wife covers her face with her hands, unable to watch but unwilling to leave. The older of his 2 children, a boy of perhaps 10 years, stares with the wide-eyed fascination of youth, encountering the full weight of adult consequences for the first time. The executioner is a craftsman of sorts, experienced in the precise application of official punishment. He examines the branding iron carefully, testing its heat against a piece of leather that hisses and smokes at the touch. Satisfied, he nods to the king's justice, who gives a solemn nod of authorization. The crowd grows completely still, even the children sensing that something momentous is about to occur. William Blackwood, the king's justice intones, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. You have been found guilty of theft 3 times over. By the grace of our sovereign lord the king, and in accordance with the laws of this realm, you shall bear the mark of your crimes so that all may know your nature. The formal language seems to hang in the cold air like visible things, each word carrying the weight of royal authority. The actual branding takes only seconds. William's right hand is held firmly by one of the guards while the executioner applies the glowing iron to his thumb with swift precision. The hiss of burning flesh mingles with William's sharp cry of pain, a sound that seems to echo off the courtyard walls before fading into uncomfortable silence. The smell of burned skin adds itself to the charcoal smoke, creating an atmosphere that several of the watching villagers find difficult to bear. The iron is withdrawn, revealing a clear letter T burned into William's flesh. The executioner immediately applies a salve to prevent infection. Even in punishment, there's care taken to ensure the condemned man survives to live with the consequences of his actions. William cradles his injured hand against his chest, tears streaming down his face from pain and shame combined. But the king's justice isn't finished. In a gesture that surprises many of the watching villagers, He addresses William directly rather than simply pronouncing sentence and departing. "You have children," he says, his voice stern but not entirely without compassion. "This mark should remind you daily that your choices affect more than yourself. Let it turn you from the path of theft to honest labor, however hard that labor might be." Lord Robert steps forward with a purse of silver coins, pressing them into the hands of William's wife. It's not charity exactly, but rather recognition that the Lord bears some responsibility for the welfare of all who live on his lands. The gesture doesn't erase William's crime or remove his brand, but it acknowledges that justice must sometimes be tempered with practical mercy. The crowd begins to disperse slowly. The formal proceedings concluded, but their impact lingering in the cold morning air. You notice how people avoid looking directly at William as he's released from his bonds, their discomfort with the harsh punishment evident in their downcast eyes and hurried departure. This isn't the communal justice of the stocks or the shared pursuit of the hue and cry. This is something more final, more isolating. William's wife helps him wrap his injured hand in clean linen, her movements gentle but efficient. She's clearly thought about this moment, prepared for the practical necessities that follow the formal punishment. Their children press close, the younger one crying softly while the older boy stares at his father's bandaged thumb with a mixture of curiosity and dawning understanding. Master Geoffrey the brewer approaches the family hesitantly, speaking quietly with William's wife about work that might be available despite her husband's new status. Others follow his example. Not all, but enough to show that the community won't completely abandon one of its own, even marked as he now is. The conversations are brief and conducted in lowered voices, but they represent a form of mercy that exists alongside the king's harsh justice. The king's justice and his retinue prepare to depart, their official business concluded. They'll move on to the next village, the next county, carrying royal law to communities throughout the realm. For them, William's case is simply one entry in a ledger of punishments administered, notable only for its proper completion according to legal procedure. They leave behind them a man forever changed and a community forced to grapple with the harsher realities of medieval justice. You linger in the courtyard as it empties, watching the servants extinguish the brazier and clear away the formal trappings of the king's court. The frost is melting now as the sun climbs higher, turning the cobblestones dark with moisture. The ordinary business of the manor resumes: servants carrying water, stable boys leading horses, the cook directing preparations for the midday meal. The branding iron lies cooling beside the dying coals, its purpose fulfilled for now. In a few hours, it will be packed away with the other instruments of royal justice, ready for the next case, the next village, the next person who must bear the permanent mark of their crimes. There's something deeply sobering about its mundane appearance. Just a piece of shaped iron, yet capable of changing a life forever. William and his family make their way slowly toward the village, his wife supporting his weight as shock and pain take their toll. Their neighbors give them space, but don't abandon them entirely. Goodwife Martha presses a small jar of healing salve into the wife's hands, while Master Hugh quietly mentions that his shop could use someone to sweep floors and tend the fire. As you follow the path back toward the village, you can't help but reflect on the different faces of medieval justice you've witnessed. The stocks and pillory serve their purpose through public shame. The hue and cry engages the entire community in upholding law, and festivals like the harvest celebration remind everyone of their shared bonds. But the branding represents something else entirely. The point where community justice gives way to royal authority, where mercy yields to the inexorable machinery of formal law. The afternoon sun slants through the bare branches of the oak trees lining the path, creating patterns of light and shadow that shift with your movement. There's a melancholy beauty to the late autumn landscape, all brown earth and gray sky, that seems to match the mood left by the morning's grim proceedings. Your breath still forms small clouds in the cooling air, and you pull your cloak tighter against the chill. In the distance, the village church bell tolls the noon hour, its bronze voice carrying clearly across the fields. The sound is comforting in its familiarity, a reminder that life continues its ancient rhythms despite the harsh intrusions of formal justice. By evening, most of the villagers will be gathered around their hearths, sharing simple meals and familiar conversation. The morning's drama will fade into memory, joining the long catalog of difficult days that rural communities must endure. You don't need to linger on the harsh details of William's punishment. Just let the scene dissolve like morning frost in sunlight. As the shadows grew longer and the air grew colder, your mind began to drift toward warmer thoughts, softer images of medieval life where mercy balanced justice and communities cared for their own, even those who bore the permanent marks of their mistakes. The harsh memory of William Blackwood's branding still lingers in the village air like smoke from a dying fire. But as the days pass, the rhythm of daily life slowly reasserts itself. Winter approaches with its own demands, and there's comfort to be found in the ancient routines that have sustained farming communities through countless seasons of hardship and renewal. Tonight, you find yourself drawn to the warm glow emanating from the windows of a modest cottage on the village's edge, where the Carpenter family has invited you to share their evening meal and hearth. The cottage itself is humble but well-maintained, its thatched roof thick enough to keep out the worst of winter's bite. Smoke rises steadily from the central chimney, carrying with it the scent of burning oak and the promise of warmth within. As you approach the heavy wooden door, you can hear the gentle murmur of voices inside, punctuated by the occasional crackle of logs settling in the fire. There's something deeply appealing about this simple domestic scene after the formal severity of the king's justice and his court. Agnes Carpenter opens the door before you can knock, her weathered face creasing into a welcoming smile. She's a woman in her middle years, her hands rough from decades of work, but her eyes still bright with the intelligence that has helped her family survive through good seasons and lean ones alike. Come in," she says, ushering you quickly inside before the cold air can follow. Robert's been telling the children about the old days, and there's still plenty of pottage in the pot. The interior of the cottage envelopes you like a warm embrace. The main room serves as kitchen, dining area, and gathering place, with a great stone hearth dominating one wall. The fire burns bright and steady, its light dancing across the rough-hewn beams that support the low ceiling. Bundles of dried herbs hang from the rafters, sage, thyme, and rosemary, their scent mingling with the wood smoke to create an atmosphere of homey comfort. Robert Carpenter sits in a chair beside the fire, his tools of trade arranged neatly on a nearby shelf. He's a man shaped by his craft, his hands scarred from years of working with wood and metal, his shoulders broad from wielding heavy hammers and axes. But tonight, those same hands hold a wooden cup of ale with gentle care, and his voice carries the soft cadence of someone telling stories to children who hang on every word. The Carpenter children, 3 of them, ranging in age from perhaps 6 to 14, sit on stools arranged in a semicircle around their father's chair. Little Emma, the youngest, leans against her mother's knee while Agnes stirs the pottage pot with a long wooden spoon. The 2 boys, Peter and John, listen with the rapt attention that children reserve for tales of times before their own memory began. "Sit here," Agnes says, indicating a stool near the fire. Robert was just telling them about the time Lord Henry's grandfather built the Great Hall, back when his own father was learning the carpenter's trade. She ladles thick pottage into a wooden bowl, the mixture of barley, vegetables, and small pieces of meat steaming in the firelight. The smell makes your stomach rumble with anticipation, and you realize how long it's been since you've shared a simple family meal. Robert nods acknowledgement of your presence, but continues his story without pause, his voice taking on the rhythm of someone who has told this tale many times before. "The old lord wanted a hall that would last for centuries," he says, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "So he brought in master craftsmen from as far away as London, men who knew secrets of joining wood that had been passed down through generations of guild masters." The story unfolds slowly, like a tapestry being woven thread by thread. Robert describes the massive oak timbers that had to be felled in a specific season, when the sap was low and the wood would be strongest. He tells of the careful selection of each beam, the precise cutting of joints that would hold for centuries without a single iron nail. His hands move as he speaks, sketching the shapes of mortise and tenon joints in the air, showing how wood could be made to hold itself together through the simple application of ancient knowledge. Young Peter interrupts with a question about the tools used in such work, and Robert's face lights up with the pleasure of sharing his craft. He reaches for a small wooden box beside his chair, opening it to reveal chisels and planes worn smooth by decades of use. "These were my father's," he says, letting Peter hold a particularly fine chisel. "And his father's before him. The metal is old, but it holds an edge better than anything the new smiths can make." The conversation naturally turns to the different aspects of the carpenter's trade, not just the grand projects like manor halls and churches, but the everyday work that keeps a village functioning. Robert has made the wooden frames for the stocks and pillory, the handles for the blacksmith's hammers, the yokes that help oxen pull their plows. His work touches every aspect of village life, from the cradles where babies sleep to the coffins that carry the dead to their final rest. Agnes serves the pottage with chunks of brown bread still warm from the morning's baking. The meal is simple but satisfying, the kind of food that has sustained working families through countless generations. The barley is soft and savory, the vegetables tender from long cooking, and the small pieces of meat add richness to every spoonful. You eat slowly, savoring both the food and the comfortable atmosphere of the cottage. As the meal progresses, the conversation turns to more recent events. Robert speaks carefully about William Blackwood's branding, his voice taking on a different tone when he addresses such serious matters. "A man's got to eat," he says, stirring his pottage thoughtfully. "But there's ways to ask for help that don't involve taking what isn't yours. The village has always found work for those willing to do it, even if it's not the work they might prefer." Agnes nods agreement, but her expression shows the complexity of her thoughts. "William's wife came by yesterday," she says quietly. "Asked if we might have mending work she could do. I gave her some torn linens and a few coins, but it won't go far with winter coming on." The implicit criticism of William's choices hangs in the air. He's left his family to bear the consequences of his actions, marked as they now are by his criminal status. The children listen to this adult conversation with the serious attention of young people beginning to understand the complexities of their world. Little Emma doesn't fully comprehend the discussion, but she senses its gravity and moves closer to her mother's protective presence. The boys exchange glances that suggest they've been talking about William's fate among themselves, trying to understand how a man they've known all their lives could end up branded as a thief. Robert sets down his spoon and looks directly at his sons. "What happened to William Blackwood is a lesson for all of us," he says, his voice carrying the weight of paternal authority. "Not just about stealing, but about the choices we make when times are hard. There's always another way if you're willing to swallow your pride and ask for help." The fire crackles and settles, sending up a small shower of sparks that dance briefly before disappearing up the chimney. The sound draws everyone's attention for a moment, creating a natural pause in the conversation. Agnes rises to add another log to the flames, and the renewed light reveals the simple comfort of the cottage interior. Rough wooden furniture made smooth by use, clay pots arranged neatly on shelves, bundles of wool waiting to be spun into thread. As the evening deepens, Robert's stories shift from tales of carpentry to older narratives, legends that have been passed down through generations of village families. He tells of the time when Danish raiders came up the river, and how the villagers hid in the woods until the danger passed. He speaks of the Great Plague that swept through the region when his grandfather was young, and how the village survived through mutual aid and careful cooperation. These stories serve a purpose beyond mere entertainment. They're lessons in survival, templates for how communities endure through crisis and change. Each tale contains implicit instruction about the importance of neighbors helping neighbors, of maintaining social bonds that can mean the difference between survival and catastrophe when times grow hard. Young John asks about the law, wondering how justice worked in the old days before there were king's justices traveling from village to village. Robert considers the question carefully before answering. "In the old days," he says, "justice was more local. The lord of the manor settled most disputes, and the village elders had more say in what happened to wrongdoers. Sometimes that meant harsher punishment, sometimes more mercy. Depended on the people involved." Agnes adds her own perspective from the woman's side of village life. "Women had their own ways of keeping order," she says with a slight smile. "A sharp tongue and a good memory for who owed what to whom. Sometimes shame worked better than formal punishment, especially for the smaller offenses that could tear a community apart if they weren't handled properly." The conversation continues in this gentle fashion as the night deepens outside. Through the small windows, you can see that snow has begun to fall. The first real snow of the season, coming down in soft flakes that catch the light from the cottage windows. The sight adds to the sense of shelter and warmth inside, making the hearth seem even more welcoming by contrast. Little Emma has fallen asleep against her mother's knee, her small body relaxed in the total trust that children show toward loving parents. Agnes strokes her daughter's hair gently, her expression soft with maternal tenderness. There's something deeply peaceful about the scene. The sleeping child, the crackling fire, the quiet conversation of adults sharing their thoughts and experiences. Robert brings out a small wooden flute, not unlike the one old Willem plays for village celebrations. But this instrument has a different purpose. It's for quiet evenings like this, when families gather around their hearths and pass the time with gentle music. He plays a simple melody, one that the children know well enough to hum along quietly. The music seems to cast a spell over the cottage, making the firelight seem warmer and the shadows more friendly. Your own eyelids begin to grow heavy as you listen to the soft tune and watch the flames dance in the hearth. There's something hypnotic about the combination of music, warmth, and comfortable company that makes you understand why people have gathered around fires to share stories and songs since the beginning of human civilization. As the evening winds down, the boys bank the fire carefully, ensuring it will burn low through the night without dying completely. Agnes tucks Emma into a small bed in the corner, the child barely stirring as she's moved from her mother's lap to the warm nest of woolen blankets. The cottage settles into the peaceful rhythm of a family preparing for sleep. Robert walks you to the door, stepping outside briefly to judge the snowfall. "It'll be a cold winter," he says, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "But we'll manage, as we always do. The village takes care of its own, even when times are hard." His words carry the quiet confidence of someone whose family has survived many winters through careful preparation and mutual support. As you step out into the snowy night, you carry with you the warmth of the cottage and the comfort of its simple domestic peace. The harsh realities of medieval justice, the stocks, the branding, the formal ceremonies of punishment, seem distant now, balanced by this glimpse into the gentler side of village life, where families gather around their hearths and share the stories that bind communities together. The snow continues to fall as you make your way through the quiet village, each flake catching the light from windows where other families are settling into their own evening routines. As the embers dimmed and the night grew deeper, you felt the peaceful weight of simple contentment, knowing that even in the harsh medieval world, there were places of warmth and love where people cared for each other and passed down the wisdom of generations. As the warmth of the peasant's hearth fades from your memory, you find yourself drawn to the towering shadow of the Lord's castle. The massive stone walls rise before you like sleeping giants, their weathered surfaces telling stories of countless seasons. Your feet carry you along a worn path that winds up the gentle slope toward the fortress, and with each step, the weight of centuries seems to settle around your shoulders like a familiar cloak. The castle stands silent in the evening light, its windows glowing softly with the amber flicker of torches. You pause at the great wooden gates, their iron hinges dark with age, and listen to the quiet sounds that drift from within. The distant murmur of voices, the soft clatter of wooden bowls, the gentle neigh of horses in the stable yard. This is not a place of war tonight, but simply a home, massive and protective, sheltering all who dwell within its walls. Your path leads you around the castle's base, where narrow stone steps descend into the earth. The air grows cooler here, carrying with it the clean scent of damp stone and the faint mustiness of underground chambers. These steps, worn smooth by countless feet over decades, lead to the castle's lower levels, places rarely seen by common folk, yet as much a part of medieval life as the great hall above. As you descend, your hand trails along the stone wall, feeling the cool, rough texture beneath your fingertips. The walls here are thick, built to last through ages, and they radiate a sense of permanence and quiet strength. Small iron brackets hold torches that cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating patterns that seem to shift and flow like gentle waves against the shore. The dungeon of a medieval castle was not the terrible place that later stories would make it seem. In these quieter times, it served more as a place of holding than harsh punishment, a stone chamber where those who had committed serious crimes might await the Lord's judgment, or where prisoners of war might be kept in relative comfort until ransom could be arranged. The very word dungeon comes from the French dungeon, meaning the great tower of a castle, a place of strength rather than suffering. You find yourself in a small antechamber, where a wooden table sits beneath a single torch. Here, the castle's steward might keep his records. Careful notes of who was held below and why, written in careful script on pieces of parchment. The ink has long since faded to brown, but you can imagine the scratch of the quill, the soft rustle of paper, the quiet concentration of a man doing his duty with careful precision. A heavy wooden door stands before you, reinforced with iron bands that have been polished smooth by time and countless hands. The lock is large and sturdy, but not cruel, built to secure rather than to torment. Through a small barred window, you can glimpse the chamber beyond, and what you see is far different from what you might expect. The dungeon is a surprisingly spacious room, its vaulted ceiling arching overhead like the inside of a chapel. The walls are lined with stones fitted so perfectly that centuries of weather have barely disturbed their bonds. Along one wall, a narrow window set high near the ceiling allows a shaft of pale moonlight to filter down, creating a soft pool of silver on the stone floor. The chamber is not empty, but neither is it crowded. A single figure sits on a simple wooden bench, his back resting against the cool stone wall. He is a man perhaps 30 years of age, dressed in the simple brown tunic of a traveling merchant. His face is not marked by suffering, but by a quiet resignation, the expression of someone who has accepted his circumstances and found a strange peace in the waiting. Beside him on the floor sits a wooden bowl, recently emptied of what appears to have been a simple but adequate meal of bread and pottage. A small clay pitcher holds water, and a woolen blanket lies folded nearby. These are not the provisions of cruelty, but of a justice system that, while firm, did not seek to break the human spirit. The merchant, for merchant he clearly is, by the way his fingers unconsciously worry at the pouch that once held his coins, has committed some transgression against the Lord's laws. Perhaps he was caught selling goods without the proper license, or maybe he attempted to avoid paying the required tolls on his merchandise. Such matters were serious in the feudal world, where every privilege and right was carefully defined and jealously guarded. But as you watch him in the quiet of the dungeon, you see no signs of harsh treatment. His hair is clean, his clothes unsoiled, and when he shifts position, he moves with the easy grace of someone whose body has not been broken by cruel treatment. Instead, he seems almost meditative, his eyes closed as he leans back against the stone, perhaps lost in memories of distant markets and familiar roads. The sound of footsteps echoes softly down the stone stairs, and presently a guard appears, not the brutal warder of later imagination, but a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He carries with him a small wooden tray bearing a cup of ale and a portion of cheese, and he greets the merchant with the courtesy due to any guest. "Good evening, Master Thomas," the guard says quietly, his voice carrying the soft accent of the local countryside. "Cook thought you might welcome a bit of cheese with your evening meal. The ale is from the same barrel the Lord's own table enjoys." The merchant, Thomas, opens his eyes and smiles with genuine warmth. "Your kindness continues to humble me, friend William. Please give my thanks to the cook, and tell her the bread was as fine as any I've tasted in my travels." They speak for a few moments more, these two men from different stations in life, yet bound together by the simple courtesies that make even difficult situations bearable. The guard inquires about Thomas's comfort, asks if he needs additional blankets as the nights grow cooler, and promises to speak with the castle's chaplain about arranging for the merchant to attend morning prayers in the chapel. As the guard takes his leave, promising to return in the morning with word from the Lord about when Thomas's case might be heard, you sense the quiet dignity that pervades even this place of confinement. This is not a system built on cruelty, but on the careful maintenance of order and the belief that even wrongdoers retain their essential humanity. Thomas settles back against the stone wall, his hands folded peacefully in his lap. In the soft light filtering through the high window, his face takes on an almost contemplative expression. Perhaps he is thinking of the choices that brought him here, or perhaps his mind has drifted to memories of his family, waiting for his return in some distant town. The silence in the dungeon is not oppressive, but peaceful, the kind of quiet that comes when a man has nowhere to go and nothing to do but wait, and has learned to find a strange comfort in the suspension of all worldly concerns. It is the silence of a monastery cell, or of a shepherd's hut on a lonely hillside, where time moves at its own gentle pace, and the rushing concerns of the outside world fade into whispered memory. You find yourself growing drowsy as you watch this scene of unexpected tranquility. The cool stone walls seem to embrace you with their ancient strength, and the soft sound of Thomas's breathing becomes a gentle rhythm that matches the slow beating of your own heart. The dancing shadows cast by the torch flames create patterns that seem to shift and flow like clouds across a summer sky, and you feel your eyelids growing heavy. Your mind may already be floating away from this quiet chamber, drifting like a leaf on a gentle stream toward the welcoming shores of sleep. The last thing you notice is the way the moonlight through the high window has shifted slightly, casting new patterns of silver and shadow on the stone floor, marking the passage of time with the ancient rhythm of the celestial dance. As consciousness begins to slip away, you carry with you the image of Thomas in his peaceful solitude, a reminder that even in the harshest systems of justice, humanity finds ways to preserve dignity and grace. The medieval world, with all its rigid structures and harsh punishments, was also a world where kindness could flourish in unexpected places, and where the human spirit proved remarkably resilient in the face of adversity. The dungeon grows quiet around you, its stone walls holding their ancient secrets, and you drift away on the wings of centuries, ready to discover what other gentle stories the past might whisper in your dreams. As your mind drifts away from the quiet stone chamber, you find yourself drawn by the gentle tolling of a bell through the cool evening air. The sound comes from across the village, where the church stands like a patient guardian against the darkening sky. Its tower rises above the humble cottages, and warm light spills from its tall windows, creating pools of golden radiance on the cobblestones below. Your feet carry you along the familiar path, past the sleeping gardens where herbs release their evening fragrances into the air. The sweet scent of lavender, the sharp freshness of rosemary, the gentle earthiness of thyme. The night is peaceful here, with only the soft rustle of leaves and the distant murmur of families settling in for the evening. A few windows glow with the warm light of hearth fires, and you can almost hear the quiet conversations and gentle laughter that mark the end of another day. The church door stands slightly ajar, and as you approach, you can hear the soft murmur of voices from within. This is not the grand ceremony of Sunday morning, but something quieter, more intimate. The evening ritual of confession and absolution that brings peace to troubled souls before they seek their rest. You step through the heavy wooden doors, their hinges whispering softly as they swing open to welcome you. The interior of the church embraces you with its familiar serenity. Rows of wooden pews stretch toward the altar, their surfaces worn smooth by countless hands and bodies over the decades. The air is thick with the comforting scent of beeswax candles and the faint sweetness of incense that seems to have soaked into the very stones of the walls. High above, the vaulted ceiling disappears into shadow, creating a sense of infinite space that lifts the spirit even as it calms the mind. Along the walls, simple paintings tell stories of saints and miracles, their colors muted by age and candlelight into soft golds and gentle blues that seem to glow with their own inner light. Near the front of the church, beside the altar with its white linen cloth and simple wooden crucifix, you see two figures engaged in quiet conversation. One is Father Benedict, the village priest, a man of perhaps 50 years whose gentle face bears the lines of countless pastoral conversations. His brown robes are simple but clean, and his hands, folded peacefully in his lap, show the soft calluses of a man who has spent his life in service to others. Across from him, kneeling on a simple wooden bench, is a young woman you recognize from the village. Her name is Margaret, and she works as a seamstress, her skilled fingers creating the fine embroidery that adorns the garments of the more prosperous families. Tonight, however, her usual confident bearing has given way to something more vulnerable, and her head is bowed as she speaks in tones too soft for you to hear. The medieval church was more than a place of worship. It was the heart of community life, a sanctuary where the burdens of daily existence could be set aside in favor of deeper concerns. Here, in the quiet hours between evening prayer and the final service of Compline, villagers would come to seek counsel, to confess their failings, and to find the peace that comes with forgiveness. Father Benedict's voice is barely above a whisper, but in the hushed sanctuary, every word carries clearly to your ears. His tone is gentle, without judgment, carrying the warmth of a man who has heard countless human struggles and learned to meet each one with compassion rather than condemnation. "Tell me, child," he says softly, "what weighs upon your heart this evening?" Margaret's voice trembles slightly as she speaks, her words coming in quiet bursts punctuated by pauses. "Father, I fear I have done wrong by my neighbor, Goodwife Anna. She came to me last week seeking a simple mending of her husband's best tunic, and I charged her more than was fair, knowing her family has little to spare since the poor harvest." She pauses, her hands twisting the hem of her own simple dress. "I told myself it was because the work was particularly fine, but in truth, Father, I was envious. Her daughter Mary is to be married come spring, and all the village speaks of the beautiful wedding that is planned. My own daughter," her voice catches slightly. "My Eleanor is past 20 now, and no young man has come forward to ask for her hand. I fear I let that bitterness poison my heart." The priest nods slowly, his face reflecting understanding rather than reproach. In the candlelight, his expression is infinitely kind, the look of a shepherd who has spent his life caring for his flock and knows well the struggles that beset the human heart. He has heard such confessions countless times, the small resentments and everyday failings that weigh so heavily on honest souls. Envy is a burden we all carry at times, Margaret, he says gently. It speaks not to your wickedness, but to your humanity. Even the saints struggled with such feelings. What matters is that you have recognized it and brought it here, to this sacred place, seeking to make amends. He leans forward slightly, his voice taking on the warm tone of a father speaking to a beloved child. Tell me, what would bring peace to your heart in this matter? Margaret raises her head, and in the soft light, you can see that her eyes glisten with unshed tears. Not tears of despair, but of relief at having shared her burden. I have prepared a purse with twice the amount I overcharged her, Father. I thought, perhaps I might leave it with her door tomorrow, with a note asking her forgiveness. And I have been working these past 3 evenings on a piece of fine lace work for young Mary's wedding dress, something far finer than she could afford to purchase. The priest's face brightens with a gentle smile. Your heart has already found the path to peace, child. The guilt you feel is not God's punishment, but his way of drawing you back to the right path. When we recognize our failings and seek to make amends, we participate in the endless cycle of forgiveness that sustains our community. He raises his right hand in the ancient gesture of blessing, and his voice takes on the formal cadence of absolution. Yet even these ritual words are infused with personal warmth. May God, who is rich in mercy and slow to anger, forgive you your transgression. Go in peace, and may his grace guide your steps toward reconciliation. Margaret bows her head to receive the blessing, and when she raises it again, her face has been transformed. The lines of worry and guilt have smoothed away, replaced by a serene expression that speaks of burdens lifted and peace restored. She murmurs her thanks to the priest and rises from the kneeling bench, her movements light and graceful as she makes her way toward the door. As she passes your pew, she pauses and offers you a gentle smile, the sort of radiant expression that comes when the soul has been cleansed and made whole again. In that smile, you see reflected all the simple goodness of village life, the way that ordinary people strive to live with honor and kindness despite the daily struggles that beset them all. Father Benedict remains seated near the altar, his hands folded peacefully in his lap as he gazes up at the simple wooden crucifix that hangs above the communion table. The candlelight flickers across his weathered features, and you can see in his face the deep contentment that comes from a life spent in service to others. This is his calling, to be a conduit for forgiveness, a gentle guide who helps his flock navigate the complex moral landscape of medieval life. The church grows quieter still as the evening deepens. One by one, the villagers who had come for evening prayer have departed to their homes, leaving behind only the whisper of prayers and the soft glow of candles that will burn through the night. The silence here is not empty, but full, pregnant with centuries of worship, confession, and absolution. You find yourself drawn to one of the simple wooden pews, its surface worn smooth by countless parishioners over the decades. As you settle onto the bench, you feel the weight of the day beginning to lift from your shoulders. The church wraps around you like a gentle embrace, its stone walls holding not just the physical space, but the accumulated prayers and hopes of generations. The scent of beeswax and incense seems to grow stronger in the quiet, creating an atmosphere of deep peace that settles into your very bones. Above, the wooden beams of the ceiling creak softly with the settling of the ancient structure, a sound as comforting as the breathing of a sleeping giant. Through the tall windows, the last light of day fades into the deep blue of evening, and the first stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Father Benedict rises slowly from his place near the altar and begins the quiet ritual of preparing the church for the night. He moves with the unhurried grace of a man who has performed these same actions countless times, each movement a small prayer in itself. He extinguishes some of the candles, leaving just enough light to create a gentle glow that will welcome any late evening visitors who might seek solace in the sanctuary. As he passes your pew, he pauses and offers you a gentle nod, not the formal acknowledgement of priest to parishioner, but the warm recognition of one human being greeting another in this sacred space. His eyes hold the accumulated wisdom of years spent listening to the struggles and joys of his flock, and in them you see reflected the endless capacity for compassion that makes forgiveness possible. The priest's footsteps fade as he makes his way to the small vestry behind the altar, and you are left alone in the peaceful embrace of the sanctuary. The remaining candles cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating patterns that seem to tell their own stories of faith and redemption. The silence deepens around you, not the silence of emptiness, but the profound quiet of a place where countless souls have found peace. Your eyelids grow heavy as you sit in the peaceful glow of the church. The wooden pew beneath you seems to soften, becoming as comfortable as the finest feather bed. The scent of candles and the faint echo of whispered prayers seem to weave together into a lullaby that speaks directly to your drowsy soul. As consciousness begins to drift away, you carry with you the image of Margaret's transformed face, the gentle wisdom in Father Benedict's eyes, and the profound peace that fills this sacred space. The medieval world, for all its harsh realities, was also a world where forgiveness flourished, where ordinary people could find extraordinary grace, and where the human spirit discovered again and again its infinite capacity for renewal and hope. The church settles into its nighttime quiet around you, its ancient stones holding their endless vigil, and you drift away on wings of peace, ready to discover what other gentle stories the darkness might whisper in your dreams. As the peace of the Camelot sanctuary fades into memory, you find yourself drawn away from the village, beyond the last cottage gardens and the final stone walls, out into the gentle embrace of the open countryside. Your feet carry you along a narrow path that winds between fields of ripening grain, where the wheat stands tall and golden in the moonlight, whispering soft secrets to the evening breeze. The air here is different from the village, cleaner somehow and filled with the ancient sense of growing things in good earth. You breathe deeply, drawing in the sweetness of night-blooming flowers, the green freshness of dewy grass, and the rich, loamy smell of soil that has been tended by countless generations of careful hands. This is the countryside that sustained medieval England, the patient fields and pastures that formed the foundation of all life in that distant time. The path beneath your feet is worn smooth by centuries of use. Farmers walking to their fields at dawn, merchants traveling between villages, pilgrims making their slow way to distant shrines. Each footstep has contributed to the gentle depression in the earth, creating a road that belongs as naturally to the landscape as the streams and hedgerows that border it. On either side of the path, the fields stretch away into the soft darkness, their boundaries marked by low stone walls built without mortar, each stone fitted carefully into place by hands that understood the patient craft of making things to last. These walls have stood for generations, sheltering growing crops from wandering livestock and marking the ancient divisions between one family's land and another's. A gentle breeze stirs the grain, creating waves that flow across the field like water, and the sound is like a whisper of contentment, the earth itself sighing with satisfaction at another season's growth. Here and there, you can see the darker shapes of fruit trees, their branches heavy with apples and pears that will soon be ready for harvest. The very air seems to hum with the quiet energy of things growing, ripening, preparing for the cycle of harvest and rest that has governed rural life since time immemorial. In the distance, you can hear the soft lowing of cattle, a sound so peaceful it seems to merge with the night itself. These are not the restless calls of animals in distress, but the gentle communication of creatures settling into their evening rest, content in their pasture and secure in the knowledge that morning will bring fresh grass and clear water. As you walk deeper into the countryside, the village lights fade behind you until they are nothing more than a warm glow on the horizon, like stars that have descended to earth to keep company with sleeping families. The moon above is full and bright, casting silver light across the landscape, and creating a world of gentle shadows and soft illumination that seems designed for peaceful contemplation. You come to a small wooden stile built into a stone wall, its steps worn smooth by countless feet over the decades. As you climb over, your hand rests on the weathered wood, and you can feel the history in its grain. The patient craftsmanship of some long-dead carpenter, the touch of thousands of hands, the slow erosion of wind and weather that has rounded its edges and softened its surface. Beyond the stile, the path leads through a small grove of oak trees, their massive trunks standing like ancient guardians in the moonlight. These trees have watched over this land for centuries, their roots running deep into the soil and their branches reaching high into the star-filled sky. In their presence, you feel the weight of ages, the slow passage of time marked not in years, but in the gradual growth of bark and the patient accumulation of wisdom that comes with endurance. The grove opens onto a hillside meadow where sheep graze peacefully in the silvery light. Their woolly forms are scattered across the slope like clouds that have settled to earth for the night, and their occasional bleating creates a gentle counterpoint to the whisper of wind through grass. A shepherd's hut sits at the edge of the meadow, its thatch roof dark against the stars and a thin curl of smoke rising from its chimney. You approach the humble dwelling, drawn by the warm light that spills from its single window. Through the glass, a luxury in this time and place, You can see the figure of an old shepherd sitting beside his hearth. His face is weathered by decades of outdoor life, creased with lines that speak of long days under sun and sky, but his expression is one of deep contentment. This is a man who has found his place in the world and made peace with the simple rhythms of rural life. The shepherd's dog, a faithful companion with graying muzzle, lies at his feet, occasionally raising its head to listen to some distant sound that only its keen ears can detect. On the rough wooden table nearby, a simple meal awaits: bread and cheese, a cup of ale, an apple from his own tree. It is a feast fit for a king, not because of its richness, but because of the satisfaction that comes from simple pleasures earned through honest labor. Through the open door of the hut, you can see into the single room that serves as kitchen, parlor, and bedroom. The furnishings are few but sufficient: a narrow bed with woolen blankets, a wooden chest for his few belongings, a shelf holding a precious book of psalms, and a small carved figure of a saint. Everything speaks of a life stripped down to its essentials, yet somehow complete in its simplicity. The shepherd rises from his chair and steps outside, his dog following faithfully at his heels. In the moonlight, his figure seems to embody all the quiet dignity of rural life, the patient acceptance of seasonal rhythms, the deep knowledge that comes from working closely with land and animals, the peaceful satisfaction of a life lived in harmony with natural cycles. He walks among his flock, checking on each animal with the practiced eye of a man who knows every sheep by sight. His movements are unhurried, economic, born of decades of practice. When he finds a ewe that has wandered slightly apart from the others, he guides her gently back to the group with a soft word and a gentle touch. There is no urgency in his actions, no anxiety about the countless things that might go wrong. Only the calm competence of a man who has learned to trust in the fundamental goodness of the world. As you watch this quiet scene, you feel yourself beginning to understand something essential about medieval life. For all the harsh punishments and strict laws you have witnessed, for all the struggles and hardships that marked daily existence, there was also this: the deep peace that comes from living close to the land, the satisfaction of work well done, the quiet joy of simple pleasures shared with faithful companions. The shepherd settles onto a wooden bench outside his hut, his dog curling up at his feet. From somewhere in the distance comes the sound of church bells marking the hour of Compline, the final service of the day. The notes drift across the countryside like a benediction, blessing the fields and flocks, the villages and their sleeping inhabitants. You find yourself drawn to sit on the stone wall nearby, your feet dangling like a child's as you gaze out over the moonlit landscape. The countryside spreads before you in all directions, a patchwork of fields and pastures, woods and streams, all bathed in the gentle light of the full moon. It is a scene of such perfect tranquility that it seems to exist outside of time itself, a glimpse of the eternal peace that underlies all the temporary struggles of mortal life. The night air is soft against your skin, carrying with it the mingled scents of hay and flowers, earth and growing things. Somewhere in the distance, a nightingale begins its liquid song, the notes falling like silver drops into the pool of silence. The sound seems to speak directly to your soul, telling stories of love and loss, of seasons turning and years passing, of the endless cycle of growth and rest that governs all life. As you sit in this peaceful place, you feel the weight of the day's journey beginning to settle into your bones. You have walked through villages and castles, witnessed justice both harsh and merciful, seen the full spectrum of medieval life from the humblest cottage to the greatest cathedral. Through it all, you have discovered that the past is not so different from the present, filled with people who loved and struggled, who sought justice and mercy, who found their small place in the great story of human existence. The shepherd's dog raises its head and looks directly at you, its eyes reflecting the moonlight with an almost human intelligence. For a moment, you feel a connection across the centuries, a recognition that transcends the boundaries of time and species. In those gentle eyes, you see reflected all the patient wisdom of creatures who live close to the earth, who understand instinctively the rhythms that govern life and death, growth and rest. A gentle breeze stirs the grass around you, and you can hear the soft rustle of leaves in the oak grove behind you. The sound is like a whisper of contentment, the earth itself sighing with satisfaction at another day completed, another cycle in the endless dance of seasons. Your eyelids grow heavy as you listen to this ancient lullaby, feeling yourself becoming part of the peaceful landscape around you. The stars above seem to grow brighter as your vision softens, their light blending with the silver radiance of the moon to create a canopy of gentle illumination. You can feel yourself beginning to drift, like a leaf floating on a quiet stream, carried by currents too gentle to resist toward the welcoming shores of sleep. In this perfect moment, suspended between earth and sky, between the medieval past and the eternal present, you understand something profound about the nature of justice and mercy, of community and solitude, of the endless human search for peace. The countryside holds all these truths in its silent embrace, offering them freely to anyone willing to sit quietly and listen to the whispered wisdom of wind and grass, of flowing water and growing things. Your consciousness begins to blur at the edges, like watercolors bleeding into soft paper, and you feel yourself becoming one with the peaceful landscape around you. The shepherd continues his quiet vigil, the sheep graze contentedly in the moonlight, and the nightingale's song weaves through the air like a thread of pure music, binding all things together in a tapestry of perfect harmony. As you drift deeper into the gentle embrace of sleep, you carry with you the image of this timeless countryside, where the harsh realities of medieval life soften into something approaching paradise, where justice and mercy find their perfect balance, and where the human spirit discovers its eternal home in the quiet heart of the natural world. And so, dear friend, our quiet journey through the medieval world draws to its peaceful close. Together, we have wandered through cobblestone villages where the scent of fresh bread mingled with wood smoke, explored castle dungeons that held more dignity than darkness, and witnessed the gentle rituals of forgiveness in candlelit sanctuaries. We have seen justice both harsh and merciful, watched communities gather in market squares and monastery gardens, and discovered that even in times long past, the human heart sought the same things it seeks today: understanding, compassion, and peace. As your mind continues to float through these centuries-old scenes, let the weight of the day slip away like morning mist rising from quiet fields. The medieval world we've explored tonight was not so distant from our own, filled with ordinary people who loved their families, tended their gardens, and struggled to live with honor in an uncertain world. In their patient acceptance of life's rhythms, in their quiet dignity in the face of hardship, and in their endless capacity for both justice and mercy, they offer us timeless lessons about what it means to be human. The countryside where we ended our journey still exists, though changed by centuries of seasons. The stone walls still mark ancient boundaries, the church bells still call across the fields at evening, and shepherds still watch over their flocks under the same stars that guided our medieval ancestors. Time moves in great circles as well as straight lines, and in sleep we can touch those eternal patterns that connect all human experience. As the nightingale's song fades into the gentle silence of the countryside, as the shepherd settles into his peaceful vigil, and as the moonlight continues its ancient blessing of field and forest, let your breathing slow and deepen. Feel yourself sinking into the soft embrace of your bed, as comfortable as the finest feather mattress in a medieval castle, as peaceful as a monk's cell filled with candlelight and prayer. Tonight, we've wandered through villages and castles, witnessed the complex dance of justice and mercy that shaped medieval life, and discovered that the past holds not terror but wisdom, not darkness but gentle illumination. The stories we've shared will continue their quiet work in your dreams, weaving themselves into the deeper rhythms of rest and renewal that heal both body and spirit. Sleep well, friend. May your dreams be filled with the gentle sounds of distant bells and rustling wheat, with the warm glow of hearth fires and the silver light of an eternal moon. And perhaps, in the quiet hours before dawn, you'll find yourself once again walking those peaceful paths through time, discovering new stories of human dignity and grace in the endless archive of history. Until we meet again on another evening's journey, rest well in the knowledge that the past is not lost but lives on in every act of kindness, every moment of forgiveness, and every quiet choice to live with honor in an uncertain world. Good night, and may the peace of centuries settle gently over your dreams.